I'm pleased to call the public hearing of October 19th, 2023 to order. This meeting is convened by electronic means. As such, council members may participate in person or by electronic means. For council members participating by electronic means, please ensure your video is turned on and let the clerk know if you leave the meeting for the purposes of confirming quorum. Council members are reminded that in accordance with section 14.13 of the procedure bylaw, members must enable their video to confirm quorum. If council members attending by electronic means lose connection during any portion of the hearing, we will recess the meeting until the connection is restored. If council members lose connection during the voting process, staff will get you back online quickly while we suspend the voting process. The contact information has been circulated to all of you. Members of the public can view the proceedings via the live stream and YouTube link, which will be tweeted out at Van City Clerk. We acknowledge today that we are on the lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. We thank them for having cared for this land and look forward to working with them in partnership as we continue to build this great city together. In case of an emergency where we need to evacuate the building, I would like to direct your attention to the exits. There are 2 exits beyond the glass doors and to the left. If these exits are obstructed, please direct your attention to the 4 exits in this chamber. I feel like I'm on an airplane. Please use the stairs. Do not use the elevator. I would also like to highlight that there is a defibrillator located at the end of the hallway outside of the council chamber. I also want to take a moment to recognize the immense contributions of the City of Vancouver staff who work hard every day to help make our city an incredible place to live, work, and play. Clerk, may we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Mayor Sim is on leave of absence for civic business all day. Councillor Carr also leave of absence for civic business all day. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Present.
And Councillor Dominato is the acting mayor and chair for today. Councillor Bly is absent. Councillor Boyle. Councillor Fry has a leave of absence for civic business all day. Councillor Montague.
Present.
Councillor Claassen.
Present.
Councillor Meisner. And Councillor Joe.
Present.
The public hearing has quorum. Chair Dominato.
Thank you, clerks. Before we begin, I have some announcements. The public may participate by speaking in person, by phone, or by submitting written comments to Mayor and Council. Speakers will have 5 minutes to make their comments and should limit comments to the merits of the report being considered. Speakers should also state whether they are in support or opposed to the recommendations and if they are a resident of Vancouver. Speakers may only speak once and should follow along online at Van City Clerk for updates on the progress of the meeting so they don't miss their turn to speak. Any comments on agenda items can be submitted in writing through our online web form at Mayor and Council Public Hearing Feedback web form. This link will also be tweeted and shared online. Those speaking on behalf of 4 or more persons or groups, including the speaker, will have 8 minutes to speak, and only if those represented are also on the line or here in person and must not be individual speakers themselves. Speakers who pre-registered with presentations are reminded that the public live feed has a slight delay. To navigate through the slides of your presentation, please say next so that the clerk may advance your slides. I also want to note the City of Vancouver's long-standing commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, including utmost respect for all genders. I remind Council that when addressing speakers and staff, we will avoid using gender honorifics and will instead refer to the person by first and last name, role, or title. A reminder that Council's role at a public hearing is to be a quasi-judicial body, which means Council is to only consider the merits of the rezoning application or heritage designation. Council members may ask clarifying questions from speakers, including the applicant, or technical advice from staff, but should save debate for after the close of the speakers list. After hearing from speakers, Council may 1. Approve the application in principle, 2. Refuse the application, or 3. Refer the application to staff for further consideration. Finally, if Council does not conclude hearing from all speakers this afternoon, we will recess and reconvene the meeting on Thursday, October 24th, 2023 at 3 p.m. Before I introduce the first item, I am just going to remind Council that while we do have quorum, we only have 7 members of council for today's public hearing and number on LOAs. And so just be mindful if you're needing to step out for a bio break or a cup of coffee or water. The clerks will also pay attention, but we can always take a slight pause if someone needs to leave for a moment. So just flagging that. So just moving on to our first item of this agenda, which is zoning and development bylaw amendments to allow wine on shelf sales in Vancouver grocery stores. Does any member of council wish to declare a conflict of interest on item 1? Hearing none, the clerk will now read the application and summary of correspondence received to date.
This is an application by the General Manager of Development, Buildings and Licensing to amend zoning and development bylaw to allow wine on shelf sales in grocery stores to increase consumer selection and align with current policies, practices, and regulations in other BC municipalities that allow wine sales in grocery stores. Following correspondence has been received since referral to the public hearing. One piece of correspondence in opposition. This represents all correspondence received up to 1 p.m. today.
Thank you, clerks. And I'll do our first call for speakers at this time. Any speakers for this item who wish to speak to council, please call toll-free 1-833-353-8610, followed by participant code 1061445# before the close of the speakers list. The phone number will be shared online and made available on the live stream. There will be an opportunity for new speakers and missed speakers to be added to the end of the registered speakers list. We have staff here from Planning, Urban Design, and Sustainability who are here to present the application. I'll turn it over to staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Councillors. My name is Sarah Hicks. I'm the Chief License Inspector. I'm here representing DBL and with colleagues from PDS in order to present the report for wine on shelf. We do have a short presentation available for you today. I'll just give that a moment to come up on the screen. There we go. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we're here today as a result of a motion from Council passed in April 2023, directing staff to report back on amendments that would allow wine on shelf in Vancouver grocery stores, thereby increasing consumer selection, convenience, and aligning our policies and practices with regulations across the province, and particularly in the Metro Vancouver region. Since 2015, the province has allowed the retail sale of liquor in eligible grocery stores under 2 models, the wine on shelf model and the store-in-store model. As the name describes, wine on shelf means a grocery store can have dedicated shelf space to sell wine. The store-in-a-store model allows the sale of beer, wine, and spirits in a store that is physically separated from its host grocery store by immovable barriers and with access points restricted. As per the province's regulation, an eligible grocery store must have a minimum of 10,000 square feet of space, which includes storage space, and must be primarily engaged in retailing of all different types of food and brands, and all different types and brands of food. Our regulations currently allow for the store-in-store model. Wine on shelf is not explicitly permitted. The wine on shelf model exists in 32 grocery stores in 20 BC cities. There are 2 different provincial license types that allow for the wine on shelf model in grocery stores: the specialty wine store license and the BCVQA license. All special wine store licenses have been auctioned and issued directly to grocery stores. All BCVQA licenses have been issued and are held by BC wine growers who have appointed grocery store to operate all but one of their licenses. As the slides note, the province has a freeze on issuance of any new licenses. Relocation of an existing license is permitted. In enabling the wine on shelf model, staff considered 2 options. Option 1, with no additional regulations, and option 2 would be to apply existing requirements under the liquor store guidelines, such as location and distancing criteria. In assessing of both the options, staff considered how consumer selection and convenience would be impacted, what approaches are taken in other cities, as well as stakeholder feedback and potential public health impacts. Having no additional regulations provides the greatest flexibility in existing license holders. They can determine which of their eligible grocery stores in Vancouver they want to relocate a license to thereby provide more opportunity for consumer selection and convenience. If the liquor store guidelines were applied, there would be very limited opportunity. Further, the grocery stores that a wine on shelf license could be relocated to may not be the preferred location for a licensee. When looking in on other jurisdictions, there are currently 20 different cities that have a grocery store that sell wine on their shelves. 17 have no additional regulations. The cities of North Vancouver, Kamloops, and Maple Ridge set distancing requirements for grocery stores that want to sell wine, similar to what the province has in place for their full-service liquor stores. The province requires full-service liquor stores to be located at least 1 kilometer from each other. Staff also consulted with a range of stakeholders. Feedback included support for option 1, to have no additional regulations and the exemption from the city's liquor store guidelines. 2 stakeholders supported option 2, to establish distance requirements between grocery stores that want to sell wine from liquor stores. Reasons stakeholders provided, including the protection of public health and to create fairness to private liquor stores who are subject to the city's liquor store guidelines and distancing and provincial distance requirements. Public health impacts were also considered by noting that there is a current provincial freeze on issuing new licenses, so there would not be any net new licenses issued. An existing license would need to be relocated from a community outside of Vancouver to a Vancouver grocery store. Based on the feedback from stakeholders, while there is an interest in potential relocations, uptake is expected to be low. So based on the findings and Council's direction to increase consumer selection and convenience and to align with other cities, staff are recommending enabling wine on shelf through amendments to the zoning and development bylaw. Staff also recommend that grocery stores selling wine on shelf not be subject to distancing requirements for the reasons noted in the previous slide. To allow wine on shelf sales in grocery stores in accordance with provincial regulations, staff are proposing that wine on shelf provisions be added to the zoning and development bylaw under section 11 of the use-specific regulations for the existing land uses of grocery store and grocery store with liquor store. These proposed use-specific regulations would allow wine on shelf in grocery stores and grocery stores with liquor stores as a permitted use. Thank you so much. Staff are available for any questions.
Thanks very much for the presentation. I do see Councillor Clausen. I'll just advance you on the queue. Go ahead, Councillor Clausen.
Thanks very much. Thank you for the presentation. I know that you indicated that the uptake is going to be held back by the number of licenses available, and companies have yet to explain how they want to manage those licenses right now. Do you have any sense of what the likelihood is of Vancouver becoming a destination for one of those licenses?
We understand that there is interest in moving a couple of licenses to the city based off what licensees have advised us. All licenses are currently in use, which will mean decommissioning the existing license in that community in order to move it here and set up that store. So a couple, potentially.
Thanks. Have you been able to communicate with any other British Columbia municipalities that currently have the wine on shelf regulations established?
Yeah, we did look into the regulations and talk with staff in a number of communities.
Any sort of top level takeaways from their experience that they shared?
They didn't express any concerns about the operations of the stores in their jurisdictions.
Were additional requirements for security or public safety issues raised by them?
Not specifically by them. The province has requirements that each store enabling this type of sales model must provide a security plan, which covers things like CCTV, access to minors, the cashiers, anybody processing the sale of the product, all must have serving it right. There's a list of requirements that they have to meet.
Can you quickly explain the serving it right and the requirement of having somebody who's trained at the till?
Yes, Serving It Right is a program provided on behalf of the province, which is used in a number of service industries where a staff member is serving alcohol in order to recognize signs of intoxication, upper limits, how to have those conversations with clients in order to not sell products. Safety.
Obviously, enforcement of whether they're a minor or not.
Of course, yes, sorry.
So that is an embedded requirement
Yes.
for being able to serve, to sell wine in grocery stores. Okay.
Yes.
And just back to the other municipalities, to your knowledge, of any expressed regret since adopting these new requirements?
Not that we're aware of.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Councillor Clausen. I don't see anyone else on the queue, but I do have one quick question before we move to speakers. I'm just curious if you could comment on conversations you've had with the province around the existing provincial licenses, and you mentioned that there's been a freeze on those for a number of years now. Is there any consideration to lifting that freeze?
Not that staff have advised us of.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, with that, I don't see any other speakers, so we'll now hear from the public. I'll do a second call for speakers. If there are any speakers for this item who wish to speak to council, please call toll-free 1-833-353-8610, followed by participant code 106-1445# before the close of the speakers list. The phone number will be shared online and made available in the live stream. Any speakers in the council chamber, please come forward to the podium before the close of the speakers list. As a reminder, speakers will have 5 minutes to make their comments and should limit their comments to the merits of the report being considered. And we do have a number of registered speakers to this item, so we will start with registered speaker 1, Patricia Daly, Vice President, Public Health and Chief Medical Health Officer with Vancouver Coastal Health. Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you. And I believe we have a presentation that,
And we'll get
yeah, there it is, good.
that for you.
Can I advance it or will someone, you'll advance it, okay. Happy to join you, Chair and Council. I brought my colleague, Dr. Althea Hayden. I'm coming as your medical health officer for the city. Next slide. We want to acknowledge we're pleased to present this on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. Next slide. We are opposed to the recommendation, and there's a detailed report attached to the staff report from Vancouver Coastal Health. You also have a letter from our board, Vancouver Coastal Health, and I'm just going to highlight a few brief things. Alcohol is one of the most significant causes of preventable illness and death in the city of Vancouver. It is a Class 1 carcinogen in the same category as asbestos and arsenic, and we know availability of alcohol increased in the pandemic due to a whole variety of policy changes, both provincially and locally, while public health was busy with other things and was not able to step in and oppose these changes. And this year, new Canadian guidelines have highlighted the significant health concerns with alcohol and noted that people who consume 7 or more standard drinks per week are at very high risk for cancer, heart disease, and other harms. Next slide. Now, while we think of BC as being a healthy a population with lower rates of smoking and obesity than the rest of Canada, we actually have the highest or among the highest rates of alcohol consumption in Canada. And Vancouver City Centre in particular has higher rates than we see elsewhere in the province, with the average consumption in 2022 of all those 15 and older of 17 standard drinks per week. That's average, so 50% of people drink more. That's more than double the limit for that, the recommended for high-risk effects of alcohol. Next slide. And actually, the changes that have occurred in recent years to increase alcohol availability have led directly to increased consumption. And not surprisingly, we are seeing increased health effects. Over the last decade, hospitalizations in Vancouver have increased by over 40%. This is at a time when no additional emergency departments have opened, no additional hospital beds have opened, so it's straining our already constrained healthcare system and limiting our ability to treat people with other health conditions who appear at our hospital emergency departments, and we know this will only get worse if alcohol is made even more available. Next slide. And unfortunately in Vancouver, while we'd like to think we have a culture of moderation, we don't when it comes to alcohol. We have a binge drinking culture, which means people are likely to consume large quantities of alcohol at one sitting. The Stanley Cup ride is the most obvious historic event associated and fueled by alcohol. But people in Vancouver, adults, report very high levels of binge drinking, particularly those people who live in areas already well served by access to alcohol. Next slide.
So I'm just going to make a couple comments about how does this relate to wine on shelves. So I think all of us have worked in an office setting perhaps, or some other workplace setting, and someone brings you a donut. For me, that accounts for almost all my donut consumptions in a year. But people have a harder time drawing that relationship to the way that wine on shelves will influence their behavior. Unfortunately, or fortunately, there's a huge body of evidence, literature, that demonstrates that it does ultimately increase how much we drink. Availability, even if you don't perceive it, does subtly increase the number of drinks you will have in a week. Next slide. This is our current proximity to liquor retail. So 94% of residents of Vancouver are within a 15-minute walk of liquor. That is a high level of convenient access. I can hear you saying in the back of your head, she's telling me that access is bad and we're only going to marginally change that. Really, what's the harm? Well, even with this high degree of accessibility, we have evidence that increasing accessibility will further increase consumption and increase harms. Next slide. From our local data, we can see that based on the My Health, My Community survey, those who lived within 250 meters of a liquor retail have a higher, well, compared to those who live within 250 meters, those who live over 1 kilometer from a liquor retail store have a lower odds of binge drinking, 45% lower odds of binge drinking. And the same trend can be seen for liquor establishments or restaurants that serve in person. So it may not always feel true, and it might be that it doesn't feel true that this change would affect your drinking behavior because you might be less likely to be affected by it. The academic literature shows us that the people whose drinking behavior is most shifted by availability are those who have an existing alcohol use disorder and youth. And I think those are two communities that we have an obligation to consider when thinking about these policies.
Next slide. And I'll just finish by talking about some of those vulnerable populations we're most concerned about. First, youth. Last month, the mayor supported a change to the rules of decriminalization of illicit drugs in BC to remove public spaces used by children because of concern that children will witness drug use. In fact, the psychoactive substance that is most harmful for Vancouver children is alcohol. It is the #1 substance responsible for overdoses at BC Children's Hospital Emergency Department. And Vancouver youth report very high rates of alcohol consumption and harmful use, as this slide shows. Next slide. This will be what our children will see if we allow the sale of wine on grocery store shelves. Alcohol on the same shelves as healthy food, normalizing it for our generations of children. Next slide. Althea mentioned those with alcohol use disorder. I think council is aware that Vancouver has the highest rate of opioid overdose death in BC because we have the highest number of people at risk with opioid use disorder. What you may not realize is that we have nearly twice as many people with severe alcohol use disorder. This is much higher than surrounding municipalities. For example, Richmond has 1/3 the population of Vancouver, but only 1/8 the number of people with alcohol use disorder. And finally, next slide, data from the First Nations Health Authority shows that status First Nations people have 3 times the mortality rate from alcohol consumption as the rest of the population due to the history of colonization. And the mortality rate is actually highest in our health authority, driven by Vancouver. And in a city of reconciliation, this should be cause for concern. Next slide.
Dr. Daly, I'm just going to flag you. You've given you an extra minute, but if you could wrap up.
We're supposed to have 8 minutes because we're registered as a group.
Is that right, Tina?
Yeah.
I misunderstood
Yeah.
that case.
Yeah, we have our group here.
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead.
And actually, this is our last slide, regardless. Just to summarize, we are opposed to the recommendation. Alcohol is increasing in availability due to a number of policy changes in Parks Board, City of Vancouver, the province. It's led to increased consumption. We're seeing worsening population health. Alcohol on the shelves of grocery stores will normalize alcohol for children in this city. It will be a trigger for those with alcohol use disorder who are on their recovery journey, and we need to support them, and will likely have a disproportionate impact on Indigenous people. Just today, Dr. Hayden and myself this morning were actually meeting with all of our medical health officer colleagues in the province, and we unanimously recommended in an alcohol policy report that the province end the sale of alcohol in all grocery stores because of the concerns we've raised today. And I urge Vancouver City Council to be the first city to implement the recommendation from your public health experts. Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologize on the time.
No problem.
Thank you. But you do have a number of questions, so good news, you'll have lots of time. So we will start, I'll advance Councillor Kirby Young on the queue.
Yeah, thanks to Dr. Daly and the delegation. I appreciate, and I was listening intently. I have a question. You had spoken passionately about the availability and proximity and ease of access, and certainly, and the harms of alcohol First Nations populations are in terms of hospitalization. I guess I'm wondering, with cannabis, whether you would have a similar philosophy as we're seeing a proliferation of cannabis stores that are in every neighborhood, because I can't walk through most. I live in the dense core of Vancouver, and I can't walk without seeing one, and I find like I notice them more than I do the liquor stores, to be honest. So I'm wondering if you would extend the same philosophy in terms of the availability or with the need for distancing guidelines around cannabis as that becomes more and more common, similar to alcohol.
In public health, we know there's a U-shaped curve of harms from all psychoactive substances. Substances that are illegal, driven by organized crime, have tremendous harm. So we support legalization of substances, but regulations. So we did support making cannabis legal with appropriate measures in place, distancing and other things, and close monitoring. And so far, we're not seeing harms among youth associated with cannabis. Alcohol is very different. Alcohol has a very different pattern of use and harms within our population, and particularly for young people and Indigenous people. So we can't equate the two substances. For all substances, we're trying to get to what we call the bottom of the U-shaped curve, least harms. We've gone way up the curve on legal substances to make them more broadly available. We've actually, through our government's been increasing harms from alcohol, and we need to reverse that.
But I mean,
Councillor
following.
Kirby Young.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just following up on that, I'm still trying to get my head around, because you spoke sort of the availability in that. Is it not the case that we haven't potentially seen the full impacts of that yet, because the availability is just becoming much, much more prevalent?
Well, cannabis, first of all, it's not for sale in grocery stores. Alcohol should be sold in outlets, as cannabis is, and not in grocery stores. People purchasing food can't avoid seeing alcohol. Children can't avoid seeing alcohol if they're with their parents in grocery stores. People with alcohol use disorder can't avoid seeing alcohol. It normalizes it by putting it on the same shelf as healthy food. It's much different than what we're doing with cannabis, where we have outlets that are not visible to youth. They can't they can't display items in their windows, etc.
I'll just add one more piece. So I think the statements around availability do extend to cannabis, but I think the point where the distinction we're drawing.
Hang on, Councillor Kirby Young, we've got two people speaking.
I don't mean to jump in, but I have a very limited amount of time and they will cut me off. So that's why I'm just trying to jump in a question. I'm just really trying to understand this piece around normalization, and how sort of we are different here, because you see normalization, for example, where in Europe, where people say it's not a problem because people grow up around it and there's more responsibility around consumption. So does this not follow a normalization perspective? You're saying that we are very different in human behavior?
We've heard this before from council, that we would love it if we had a European-style culture of alcohol consumption. We do not. We have a binge drinking culture. It's very clear. And we cannot change that culture. It will take generations to change that. So unfortunately, we're not the same as Europe.
Thank
Okay,
you, Dr.
I'll leave it there.
Councillor Kirby Young, do you have further questions?
No, I see there's others on the queue, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I'll advance Councillor Boyle. Go ahead.
Thanks. Appreciate you coming in and all of the data that's behind this. I have just been thinking about a lot about the chart about and the stories we've heard about increased alcohol consumption during the pandemic, and so I'm curious to better understand kind of what part of that is about correlation to increased availability. I know we've also just seen a significant rise in stress and isolation and mental health issues, and I imagine there's some connection there. How do we kind of break down and better understand what's related to what in terms of the type of public health responses that we should be acting on?
Well, alcohol consumption did increase during the pandemic. We have a large body of academic literature that shows that any increase in availability is directly linked to increased consumption and harm. So it's not just what we saw in the pandemic. Doesn't mean that stress didn't play a role, but we massively increased availability through a number of policy initiatives during that time, and none of those have been reversed. So alcohol will continue to be more broadly available as a result. This academic literature goes back decades, including through the pandemic.
What are, just on the topic of the harms of alcohol consumption, what are the other issues or approaches we should have on our mind as a local council in terms of what else we can be doing outside of whether or not this passes to be addressing whether it's mental health or other triggers?
Well, there are actually very good recommendations from municipalities to reduce the harms associated with alcohol. Historically, Vancouver has followed some of those recommendations. It's about, we support Vancouver being a vibrant, world-class city, but there are ways of engaging people, events that don't involve consumption of alcohol. So I think we don't want to go into a long list of those. There are things that can be done provincially as well. I think a minimum price per drink is critically important and maybe the most important policy initiative you'll see in our brief. One of the concerns with grocery store sales of alcohol is they can effectively lower the price by having promotions that combine food with alcohol and ultimately make it cheaper. So that's been seen wherever alcohol has been sold. Price is probably the most important factor determining consumption, and putting alcohol in grocery stores will definitely lead to lower price per drink overall because of what grocery stores are able to do.
Oh, interesting. Okay, well, I can appreciate that you don't want to go through a whole list, but I would be curious to read that whole list.
We can send it to you. Yeah.
Welcome it to be circulated to all of council. I'm sure you've sent it to us before, but maybe
It's been a few years, so it's a different council, so I'm happy to,
appreciate it. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thanks, Councillor Boyle. Next on the queue, I have Councillor Clausen.
Could you reset my clock, please, Chair?
Certainly, we will do that.
Thanks very much. Thank you for the presentation. So it's my understanding, would you acknowledge the fact that the vast majority of Canadians and British Columbians drink in moderation?
No, I would not, because I just showed you data that shows that the average consumption,
83% of Canadians drink in moderation.
the average consumption in BC is about 10 drinks per week, and we've redefined what moderation is. So that changed in the new guidelines. That historically, the guidelines suggested that was moderate drinking. It is not
I could
anymore.
probably go into that particular study that you're making reference to, but
Yeah.
I wanted to say is that Stats Canada says that heavy drinking is at the lowest levels ever recorded in British Columbia at this present time.
That's false.
Down almost 40% since 2015.
Our drinking has been going up. We've been monitoring that closely. We can show you that data. And it's not, moderate drinking now is defined as 1 to 2 standard drinks per week. In British Columbia, people drink on average 9 standard drinks per week.
Impaired driving is down 8% since 2020.
Yeah, well, there are a number of factors that might lead to reduction in impaired driving.
Underage drinking is down about 20% in BC in the last 10 years.
Underage drinking, alcohol consumption among youth has been going up. We didn't include those slides, but we have that data.
People can get alcohol by ordering it online, correct?
Yes, that's another policy initiative that happened in the pandemic.
Access, correct?
But that they wouldn't be triggered by walking to get their food to see alcohol in the stores.
Mm-hmm. The average pricing of a bottle of wine ranges from about $22 to $35 a bottle. Would you consider that to be a high price?
I'm not an economist, but the point I made before is that price per drink is a very good way of reducing harms associated with alcohol. That's one of the concerns with putting it in grocery stores, because they can bundle alcohol with food for certain promotional initiatives.
Just while we're on the topic of substances, I just wanted to get a better understanding of what Coastal Health is doing to prevent the use of opioids and other hard drugs in our community.
We have programs in Vancouver schools to deal with vulnerable youth. We support early childhood development. In fact, our public health nurses spend most of their time supporting families in the first few years of life, because that's the period of time when we know we can prevent mental health and addictions in future. So in fact, most of our public health resources are focusing on especially vulnerable mothers and babies, and in schools to support vulnerable youth. Those are the basis of the prevention programs that we have in place. And of course, then we also have harm reduction and treatment programs as well.
So you're not targeting adults per se.
No, we have a lot of programs for adults in terms of prevention. But prevention is most effective if delivered at a time of early childhood when brains are developing, because that's when the risk factors for substance use disorder
I keep
start.
hearing early childhood, but not like a 30 or 40-year-old person.
In terms of prevention?
In terms of communication and programs to try and dissuade people from using opioids.
Oh, from using opioids. Well, as I said, the prevention really needs to focus on the risk factors for opioid use, and they begin in childhood and youth. So that's where we focus our efforts. We have lots of programs for adults that are available. I can't go into the whole long list.
But is there actually any, does Coastal Health have any programs? Do you have any signage, for example? I've seen signage and telling us how many drinks we're allowed to have. Do you have any signage telling people how much opioids they should be able to take?
We have lots of communication material, much of it given out in communities by peers and others about the harms of opioid use and how people can reduce those harms, where they can go if they have concerns. So we have outreach teams. We have a broad range of programs that are focused on prevention, harm reduction, and engaging people in treatment. Most of those are actually focused on adults, but our most important prevention efforts are in early childhood and for youth.
What would you say is the greatest health crisis facing the city of Vancouver at the present time?
Well, it's certainly, we're concerned about the toxic drug crisis as a significant concern for
the
this.
biggest concern.
That would be the biggest concern. But I will tell you that the number of people dying from alcohol use is about equal to those dying from the toxic drug crisis. It just takes longer to kill people, and the mortality rate is lower because, as you acknowledge, most Canadians do drink alcohol, and it's not the same risk of death per consumer as alcohol. But if we look at now the rising rates of deaths and the understanding that came out in the most recent report of how alcohol is linked to a whole host of health issues, 7 cancers, including our most common cancers, heart disease, injuries, as well as alcohol use disorder, liver disease, the ones you think of. We now understand that the number of people dying from both acute and chronic effects of alcohol would rival that. It's not as dramatic as people dying from illicit drugs.
Mm. And people are using it, but I gather about 83% of Canadians are using alcohol in moderation. You had a slide up there showing the Stanley Park riot. Do you imagine that any of those people had a $29 bottle of Okanagan Syrah before they got out there?
I can tell you that 70% of the people seen in our emergency department, which is overrun that night, had consumed alcohol. I can tell you there were over 800 charges filed. There were 4 stabbings. And the conclusion of those who reviewed that was that alcohol fueled the Stanley Cup riot. The police chief and myself at the time of the 7th game of the Stanley Cup asked the province to close provincial liquor outlets at noon, but private outlets remained open. And that's another concern with alcohol in grocery stores. The hours when it's available will be much longer, and we would not have the ability to limit sales in events like the 7th game of the Stanley Cup.
Thank you for that response. I am going to interject because we are now over 5 minutes, Councillor Clausen. I'm going to advance Councillor Zhou question. Oops, I didn't do that right. Clerk can fix that for me. Or I could just remove myself. You can do. Thank you. Councillor Zhou, you can go ahead with your questions while we fix that.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Dr. Daly, for speaking at council. I think my colleague know that I don't drink alcohol at all. So I'm asking this question purely from a science and academic perspective. So for the 20 species cities that allow the wine on shelf sales, do we have any evidence that in those 20 cities, people are easy to access alcohol than other cities?
We would have to speak to the public health officials in those cities. We've only done our analysis in the city of Vancouver.
Okay, so I would be very interested to see that numbers, because without that number, how would we see that Vancouver will increase the accessibility to wine? I'm just, having a hard time to make that correlation between.
Well, I think we have to consider that Vancouver, and a lot of this over the pandemic, but the province has done a lot of this too. It's not just Vancouver. In the last 8 to 10 years, has taken a number of steps that have increased alcohol availability. Any of these on their own may have seemed small. Expanding patios during the pandemic, allowing home delivery of alcohol, allowing alcohol consumption in parks, but together, each one of them increases availability, increases consumption, and you saw the hospitalization has gone up 40% in 10 years. So all of these, we believe, based on academic evidence, any increase in availability will lead to increase in harm. And at some point, we have to say enough is enough. This is not the way we improve create a world-class city on the backs of people who may suffer harms from this policy.
Yeah, I'm just interested to know that it is because of the one on shelf policy in those cities, or it is because of other factors like the stress level in the community, or any other reason. So I'm just curious to see if there's a.
So I think it's going to be very difficult for us to disentangle those factors because the baseline availability in alcohol varies a lot from community to community. So when population density is different, you think about, I grew up in a small town, you're never going to have the same physical proximity or hours availability on any good being sold. So I'm not sure that we can draw the correlation you're asking us to draw, but the principle still applies. If by adding wine in grocery stores in Fort McMurray, wherever, increase the total availability of alcohol, I am confident that if measured appropriately, it would show that consumption increased.
Okay, that's all my question. Thanks, Chair. Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Zhou. I just have a couple of quick questions for you. Just one, you had a slide earlier that highlighted the hospitalizations over the number of years. Could you give examples of the nature of those hospitalizations? Because that's broad. That could probably be a number of things. I don't want to assume what those may be. So if you have some examples of what the highest number, what those are, the nature of those, that would be great.
Well, it ranges from people that have come in directly with alcohol use disorder, liver disease associated with alcohol, but we've also taken the proportion of certain cancers, heart disease, and others that we know are alcohol related. So this is standard methodology that the province and Canada uses to look at hospitalizations that we've applied. So it includes a range of health conditions, but we've not included all those, the admissions, only those that we believe might be alcohol related.
And could that also include accidents or?
Oh, yes, injuries. Injuries is something that we've seen an increase in with alcohol availability. So when I look at what's gone up in recent years, it is liver disease, some of the more things that we think of most closely associated, cardiovascular disease and injuries.
Okay, that's great. And then my one other question is just with respect to the comment around the normalization of having wine on shelf in grocery stores. And the context to my question being, I lived in Europe for 2 years, and that was very much commonplace. And you might pick up your groceries and buying a bottle of wine for dinner that weekend or whatever. And I appreciate your comment about maybe difference in culture. We have a history with prohibition in this country, and mirroring the U.S. May be a factor in that. But are there opportunities from your perspective of taking normalization and leveraging it for good, and educating both our young people, but also the adults, all of us being adults who've grown up with a culture of, going out for a beer or wine, it's part of a social aspect of our culture, that we could leverage that for a positive opportunity to do better in terms of our education awareness around moderation, because I think that's where you're trying to drive to. So that's the question of managing those health concerns, but also moderation. So what do you think?
Well, I appreciate that. And I think that's, yes, ideally we'd like to get to that stage. And certainly a lot of the education we do with young people, it's not about prohibition, it's about making wise choices. And I'm a person who consumes alcohol, and I understand it's an important part of our culture, but I think we have to recognize the history here. It's very challenging to change the culture. And we'd love to have even the culture in some other Canadian provinces where they do have wine on the shelves of grocery stores, and they don't see the same levels of harm as we do, that we do have that binge drinking culture. We have a significant concern with urban Indigenous people, the history of colonization, the alcohol use disorder, certainly higher rates in that community. And that's in part why our board, 3 members of whom are First Nations, are very, very concerned. And actually one of the things they recommended is that you engage with the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations before implementing any further access to alcohol, because they're so concerned about the impact of alcohol in those communities. So there are a number of complex historical reasons why we have the culture we have. I would love it if we could change and have a culture that, yes, we all enjoy including alcohol as part of our culture, or most people do, not everybody, but that's not where we are in the city of Vancouver right now.
Okay. Thanks for answering all of our questions. I appreciate you took it. You got the hot seat today. But thank you for coming in and presenting that data and for all the questions from council. I'm going to continue with our speakers. Miles Proden, President and CEO of Wine Growers BC, who is, I understand, is on the phone. Is that correct? We have Miles?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Miles. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, good afternoon. My name is Miles Prodan. I am the President and CEO of Wine Growers British Columbia, and I'm speaking on behalf of the wine industry across the province in favor of this motion. I am not in Vancouver, a resident of Vancouver, actually in the sunny Okanagan, and it's my pleasure to speak to this today. I can tell you that it is an important aspect for our wine industry, which is, again, spread out throughout the province. I think there's a misunderstanding many times that we're somehow centered in the Okanagan Valley, and while that's where the bulk of these rural located wineries and grape growers are, we certainly reach the breadth and depth of the entire province. This is an important industry in terms of economic impact to the province. Last time we did the analysis, it was a $3.2 billion economic impact, and it is significant. And it's not just about the wine that we produce. It's about the tourism that is garnered, and people come to visit wineries that, again, are rural. It's really very much about the growing aspect of it. But when it comes to wine and grocery, we can speak somewhat confidently about how important it is, as there are 32 of those licensed, and I think it was correctly identified that 20 of them belong to industry through our organization. When we had the ability to move them onto a grocery shelf a number of years ago, it provided a much-needed access for the ever-growing number of wineries across the province. Access to the consumers is a challenge anytime. That's the key point. You can make it, you can grow it, you can make it, and you can try to sell it. But again, alcohol sales in this province are restricted. There has been a moratorium on the number of retail licenses that are available, and that just was extended for another 10 years. So I think it's important to realize that when we're talking about wine and grocery, and in the instance of our licenses, it is only 100% BC wine that our licenses are allowed to sell. That is important to be able to be able to access the consumers. We've not had an opportunity to reach directly our customers and friends in Vancouver, so this is a great opportunity to do that. Over the years that we've been responsible or overseeing those licenses through other jurisdictions, we've had very few, if any, problems with it. Alcohol is very closely monitored and regulated by the liquor distribution branch and the liquor and cannabis regulatory aspect of it. So there are many rules to follow, and the compliance for our stores has been fantastic. I respect the issue about access to alcohol, but I think it's important to understand that in the instance of our licenses, this is premium 100% BC wine. The price point for it is, we recognize, not the cheapest available alcohol there is out there, but when we're talking about wine and grocery, it's really about 100% BC product that's been grown and farmed and made here in the province. And access to the Vancouver market and the ability to enjoy that product is fundamental to the growth of this industry. There's no denying that we've been seeing a decline in alcohol consumption. At least I can talk about BC VQA wine sales in the province. We've been seeing a steady decline in that over the last couple of years. And that is problematic for a number of reasons, and not least of which is some of the climate conditions we've been seeing, and most recently forest fires and people's just tendencies to not to drink as much wine. So I just, in summary, I thank everyone for their considered approach. We've been long waiting for the opportunity to bring BC wine into grocery shelf in Vancouver. This is considered delay, we would call it, in seeing how it worked in other jurisdictions. I think makes the point that it can happen responsibly. And again, we look forward to the opportunity to bringing 100% BC wine to our friends and customers in the city of Vancouver.
Thanks, Mile. And just stay on the line because you do have a question. Councillor Clausen with a question for you.
Hey, Miles. I have some questions just to kind of go to your wheelhouse. I want to just talk to you about farming practices, education on sort of wine and viticulture, and the tourism impact. So the first question is, how much sort of organic farming are we seeing in terms of the wine industry? And I only bring that up because I think it's really important to understand that our farmers and our grape growers are trying to nurture the land that they take care of.
No, it's a good point, Councillor. We've got some very proactive practitioners of organic farming here. Listen, sustainable wine growing has been a tenet of our industry for 30 years, and in fact, I think just the fact that consumers are now getting turned on to it and is becoming more in vogue, we're well established with that, and so. I think we're ahead of the curve just because we've been doing it for so long, and more people are switching to making sure that, and it's just not because it's the right thing to do, which it is, but customers are demanding it.
I want to just talk to you about schools. I understand that there's quite a few programs, Okanagan College and UBCO and other places that are doing a lot more training. So we actually are building up quite an industry with education and training on viticulture. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And the other side of that, too, is hospitality, right? I mean, again, we can grow and make the product, but it's really about us. And I understand that I speak on behalf of BC Wine, is try to convince consumers to consider a bottle of BC wine as opposed to a bottle of Chilean or Australian wine. So it's not just a fact of the viticultural sector of it in the colleges, but the hospitality and getting people to understand that it is a great product and they should be promoting it to their customers.
We know that from all the brochures and the videos promoting tourism in British Columbia that show sweeping shots of our vineyards. Can you just, I know you gave us some big number, 3 billion and so on, but can you give us just a high level on some of the tourism benefits of this industry?
Well, again, the unique part of our industry is that we, by the very nature of being required to have it 100% BC, so you can't have a winery in the province be considered land-based unless you've actually physically tied to the land. So by that very nature, we are rural, and by that nature, we are widespread throughout the province. And so when people want to come and visit and explore and experience British Columbia outside of the main urban centers like Victoria or Whistler or Vancouver, we've got a destination for them. And again, it isn't always just about wine. It's about the wine and food culture. It's about the farming culture. And so we estimate close to 1 million visitors a year come to the province and include in that visit a visit to a winery in the province.
Last question, just about a minute or so. Can you talk a little bit about the impacts that the sector, the wine and grape growing sector has faced in the last year, just with regards to climate and other conditions that have created some real challenges?
Well, you can, and it's been, and I don't mean to be trade, it's been catastrophic. We've seen climate change impact the amount of grapes we're able to harvest. If it's not an atmospheric river, it's a heat dome, or it's freezing temperatures. So we've seen a steady decline. And last Christmas, we experienced a minus 30 freeze event here throughout the entire Okanagan Valley, which is rare. It reached all the way down to Osoyoos. But what that's going to mean practically is this harvest, which is we're just finishing up, we're going to have half as many grapes as we traditionally have or have in the past, which means there's going to be half as much wine produced. which means there's quite a few wineries that are going to be facing some very serious financial implications and impacts. You layer on top of that some of the smoke that we've seen because of the most recent forest fires here, again, specifically in the Kelowna area, and it's dire. But we'll come through it. We're farmers. We're used to adversity. Wish it wasn't that way, but that's the nature of farming. And fortunately for us, people and consumers in BC support 100% BC wine, and that's why it's so important for us to be able to access a market like Vancouver and bring our product directly into access for them.
So 15-second answer, would having BC VQA wines in BC's biggest city, grocery on shelf, help some of our winemakers? I'm sorry, you've got 8 seconds.
Without a doubt, without a doubt.
All right, thanks, Miles.
Thank you for timing that perfectly, both of you. And thank you, Miles, for calling in. I don't see anyone else on the queue to ask you questions. Have a good rest of your day.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Our next registered speaker is Krista Lee McWaters, GM and Chair of Time Family of Wines and Wine Growers BC. I understand that she is also on the phone. I got that.
I am, yes.
Hi, good afternoon. You can go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Krista Lee McWaters, and I am not a resident of Vancouver, but I am very much in support of the bylaw amendments to allow wine on shelf in Vancouver grocery stores. I am the chair of Wine Growers British Columbia and also the general manager of Time Family of Wines located here in beautiful Penticton, downtown Penticton. We have Kronos Winery, Evolve Winery, and McWaters Collection. We also have a winery at the District Wine Village in Oliver, as well as we're currently building a third winery on Naramata Bench for Evolve Cellars. I'm a second-generation BC wine grower, and I grew up in the industry, so I don't know anything other than the BC wine industry. In fact, I made my first wine when I was just 9 years old, and my father was a leader in our BC wine industry for over 50 years. Obviously, in that time, we've seen a lot of changes, and we've seen the growth of the industry. In 1979, when our family started the first estate winery in the province, we now have over 350 wineries. The economic impact of the BC wine and grape industry is substantial. As Miles mentioned, it's $3.75 billion annually to the province here. And that's been an increase of over $983 million since 2015, and an almost $2 billion increase since 2011. So huge increase. Our industry employs over 14,000 full-time equivalent workers, making up about wages of about $753 million. As Miles also alluded to, the tourism is what's key to us as an industry as well. Last year, not last year, but generally we see about 1.2 million wine tourists in the province, which equates to about $609 million. We are in desperate needs right now as far as retail support in the face of devastating impacts due to climate change events that Miles mentioned, our economic challenges, wine tourist bans and restrictions. You know, this past summer, July was looking good, and then with the forest fires and the closure of highways and travel bans, that all tourism halted here. We had highway closures, and this is all coming off of COVID as well. So our industry has struggled. We rely on tourism. For our own business, the loss of the tourist revenue this past year was roughly about 30% for us. As an industry, we're seeing decreases close to 60% in grapes this vintage, which will be an decrease in wine revenue, in taxation, and in jobs as well. The wine industry is resilient, and we've seen our fair of challenges, and we've had many setbacks, but we're currently in crisis. Smaller wineries are closing. Right now, there's over 50 wineries actively for sale. Another half dozen have closed their doors. Some just don't have sufficient cash flow to survive. Another 3 to 5 years while we rebuild as far as grapes go. So they're having to close and lay off staff. And the challenge that we have is there's just not enough places for us to sell our wine. With the loss of tourism, it's particularly tough for small and medium-sized wineries such as ourselves. We have little to no access to the British Columbia liquor stores. It can be expensive to play in the LRS channel as far as marketing programs, the low pricing they're requesting, the inducements the larger companies do, even though they're not allowed, we all know that they happen. And after COVID, restaurants and on-premise are decreasing the size of their wine list and offerings. So it leaves us with less sales channels to be able to sell our wines. Our particular company, we have 2 small wineries, and without wine and grocery, we would have been out of business 4 years ago. For us, the wine and grocery makes up more than 30% of our total sales. Save On Foods, as an example, has been an amazing partner for us. They promote the small, local, and family businesses, and they increase our consumer access to our products. With all of our current challenges, our industry needs this important sales channels as we have limited access to other ones. Vancouver and the Lower Mainland is our biggest market, and with the reduction in tourism, we need access to our consumers. Wine and grocery facilitates that access. We sell wine and grocery in many other cities and municipalities throughout the province, and we've never had any issues. I encourage you to support the local businesses and wineries and to buy local whenever possible. And I support this bylaw amendment to allow wine and grocery shelves in Vancouver grocery stores. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista Lee. Just timed it perfectly. I see Councillor Clausen has a question for you. Go
Hi,
ahead.
Krista Lee. I just really have one question, and it's really based upon your time serving on the Wine Growers Canada Board. Just want, and by the way, thank you very much for the story and the perspective and how many people are working and how in the struggles that the industry is facing right now. But I'm just curious about how Canada and the rest of Canada, from your experience and some of the probably the advocacy that you've done through the national body, sees British Columbia and British Columbia wine. It's a pretty broad question, but I'm pretty sure you know how to answer it.
Definitely. We're definitely seen as the leaders in quality and being more supportive of our industry. Unfortunately, our counterparts on Ontario do not have the consumer support quite as much as we do in our province, because I believe that as British Columbians, we're proud to serve our local products and support local business.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Krista Lee.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for calling in. We'll move to our next speaker, Bert Hick, president of Rising Tide Consultants. And I know Bert is here in person.
I love this thing. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of council. I'm here as a citizen of Vancouver, and I support this bylaw change. I live right downtown of Vancouver. My grocery store that I usually go to buy my groceries is Urban Fare on Alberni Street. And I go there, buy my groceries, then I have to go around the corner just a few feet to the government liquor store on Alberni and Butte, or go over to the Sutton Place wine store. But I would love to have an ability to buy my whatever food I want, plus also a bottle of BC wine. Years ago, my industry was, particularly the private liquor store industry, were quite opposed to the wine and grocery stores, but it's a very benign change you're making here. It's only some grocery stores will have it, not all of them. For example, there's an agreement between the Wine Institute and Overweighty that they will only be in certain stores. So the IGA store at the corner of Burrard and Smythe will not have wine on the grocery store shelves. And the program, since it was brought out several years ago by the previous provincial government, hasn't caused any major issues or concerns. Hasn't caused any major enforcement issues from the liquor branch perspective with access to minors. All the staff in the store who handle the alcohol products or sell the product have to take serving it right to check to make sure the IDs are there. So I'm very much supportive of it, and I just want to come and say hi and thank you very much, and I hope this goes through.
Thank you, Bert, for coming in today. And we'll move to, I think, our final speaker, Mark Hicken, who's also here in person. Good afternoon, Mark. You have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for listening to me. My name is Mark Hicken. I'm a former wine industry lawyer. I now work as a consultant. I'm also the former BC government liquor policy advisor. I have about 15 years of experience working on liquor policy issues. I'm a resident of Vancouver, and I support the proposed bylaw changes to allow wine on grocery shelves. This will create consistency with surrounding municipalities, support businesses in Vancouver, and consumer desire for increased convenience with respect to wine purchases. I note that due to the provincial moratorium on the issuance of retail liquor licenses, which has already been mentioned, including grocery licenses, there is likely to be very minimal uptake on this issue within the city. However, for the long term, it absolutely makes sense, in my opinion, for the City of Vancouver to be aligned with provincial liquor regulations and with the surrounding areas. I support the recommendations from the city staff in the referral report, which I think was very well done, including particularly that no distance separation requirements from other liquor stores be imposed. I think if you had an honest conversation with the people at the liquor regulators at the provincial level, they would say that it was a mistake to impose distance separation requirements in respective liquor stores. It's been nothing but a headache and a bureaucratic mess, and that's why they were not imposed provincially for cannabis stores. I have read through the Vancouver Coastal Health consultation submission. I completely agree with them that alcohol-related harms need to be addressed. However, I think it's very important to focus such efforts specifically on where the harms are being caused, and not to use an overbroad policy solution that will unfairly target others who are drinking responsibly. The approach of addressing harmful consumption and practices has worked, and an approach based on prohibition-era thinking does not. With respect, I'm not convinced by the arguments put forward by Vancouver Coastal Health related to increased access and increased alcohol-related harms. I don't think that these arguments make sense in respect of this particular issue, wine on grocery store shelves. It is my view that wine purchasing and consumption patterns are unlikely to change at all as a result of the proposed bylaw reforms, particularly when one considers how limited the uptake of the change will likely be. As staff mentioned earlier, I think you're probably only looking at a maximum of 2 grocery stores in the city of Vancouver that would change. I've spent a great deal of time over the years looking at alcohol-related harm statistics, and particularly when I was working for the government. If you look at these issues on a macro level, which is more reliable than doing small-scale studies that are often based on self-reported information, I have not seen any correlation between grocery store alcohol availability and alcohol-related harm statistics, such as impaired driving, underage drinking, or alcohol-related deaths. The last time I looked, if you compare BC to the jurisdictions to the south of us, Washington, Oregon, California, those places generally have similar or better alcohol-related harm statistics than we do, even though they have much greater availability of alcohol and wine in grocery stores. Indeed, a few years ago, I spoke at a conference in Washington State, and the folks at the Washington Liquor Control Board said that a recent expansion of retail outlets there in that state did not change their alcohol-related harm statistics at all. Earlier, Councillor Klassen mentioned that 83% of people in British Columbia drink in moderation. That is correct. And I think some of the other statistics that Councillor Klassen mentioned are correct as well. In the general overall statistics for Canada and for BC have been that alcohol-related harm issues have been decreased in the last 10 years. I think it may be important to note a couple of additional things. Dr. Daly mentioned earlier that some new guidelines had been created in Canada related to alcohol consumption. She's referring to the guidelines that were issued by the CCSA. I think it's important to note that those have not been approved by Health Canada. They are not Canadian federal guidelines. They are guidelines that were created by an advisory group to Health Canada that asked for them, but they have not been approved. They have not been adopted federally or by Health Canada. And in fact, those guidelines have been subject to some significant international criticism. Thirdly, the Stanley Cup riot was also mentioned a couple of times. I think it's also important to note that the provincial liquor regulator, the LCRB, has the power at any time they want to suspend liquor sales in all stores, not just government stores, and they have done that in the past. They can suspend all liquor sales at any time they want. So if there was, potentially another situation like that, they have the power to do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. You mentioned a report that you had been commissioned for the provincial government. Can you tell us who commissioned that report?
The provincial government,
The reviewing and recommending the sort of liquor regulations.
oh, yeah, that was a report that was commissioned by then Premier David Eby. He was the Attorney General at that time, and he was responsible for the liquor regulation, liquor licensing branch and the liquor distribution branch. And so he was the one who retained me to do that. And I worked on that for a couple of years.
I just want to, we've heard the contrast to the United States that you mentioned. I thought you made your point clear, but I just wanted to kind of maybe reiterate a little bit. We're by contrast to Seattle, to Portland, to other jurisdictions that are very similar to Vancouver and British Columbia, do they have off the charts problems because of the availability of cold beer in corner stores or wine on shelf in their grocery stores?
The last time I looked, this alcohol-related harm statistics, particularly related to impaired driving, underage drinking, and alcohol-related deaths, were almost the same in all those provinces, in all those jurisdictions. So BC, Washington, Oregon, California were very similar. But I do want to emphasize, I mean, this particular motion is related to wine on grocery store shelves. They have much greater availability of alcohol down there in grocery stores than is currently the situation in BC. And this particular proposal would be very, very limited.
Do you think we should be concerned about allowing children to see wine bottles on a shelf when their mom is shopping for groceries?
Personally, I don't think that will make any difference at all. I think if there's any concern, if an adult is going to drink wine, the children are going to see it at home. So I don't think it will make any difference at all. I'm originally British, and I grew up in a culture where you saw wine bottles on supermarket shelves. I don't think it made any difference at all. In fact, in some respects, I think it's helpful because it actually people teach they educate kids in a more sensible way, I think, than they do in North America with a sort of neo-prohibition, post-prohibition approach.
So just by extension, Dr. Daly said that it would take us generations to develop a culture of responsible wine and alcohol use. Do you think that, would you back that statement up?
Well, I respectfully disagree with that. I think that I think actually the food and wine culture in British Columbia, and particularly in Vancouver, is actually pretty healthy and quite strong. And I don't think it will take that long at all to. I think our culture is pretty good right now, and I think it will only improve as the years go by.
Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot for your questions. Thanks a lot for coming in today.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll just check in with, I think that was all of our registered speakers, clerks, but I will check in. Do we have any callers on the line as well?
Not at the moment.
We do not. We need to do a third call then, do we not? Okay, so this will be our final call for speakers. If anyone wishes to speak to this item, they should call toll-free 1-833-353-8610, followed by the participant code 1061 445# before the close of the speakers list. The phone number will be shared online and made available on the live stream. Any speakers in the council chamber, please come forward to the podium if you're here. We'll now take a 5-minute recess to see if there's any additional speakers that come forward. 5-minute recess, council. speaker online. Is that correct? Do we have quorum? Okay, we won't call you back to order. Okay, there you go. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate that. We do have a speaker on the line. I understand Marie Beck is on the line. Marie, can you go ahead? You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, yes. Hello, Councillor Dominito. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. A very important conversation around drug and alcohol abuse and how we can best manage this for everyone. I am not looking for an answer, yes or no. I'm simply making a statement. It was based on some of the presenters speaking to alcohol abuse or an overconsumption, and their metrics were based on First Nations, Indigenous communities coming from the First Nation Health Authority, and it came with no representation from the Indigenous 3 host nations or the urban Indigenous MBAC community, and there are no other visible minority metrics that were put into that place. And I just wanted to make note that this metric that was put forward is very, very not representative of how the city would like to see themselves as a city of reconciliation.
Thank you, Marie. Is that the conclusion of your remarks?
That is the conclusion. Question?
Thank you for calling in this afternoon and for bringing forward those considerations. Appreciate it. Thank you. Clerks, do we have any other speakers on the line?
Just checking, Chair. No, not for this item.
Thank you. Given there's no further speakers, the speakers list is now closed. Seeing there are little or no comments received after 12 p.m., I'm now closing the receipt of public comments as well at this time. Do staff have any closing comments on this item?
Sorry, no, staff do not have any further closing comments.
Thank you. Council, do you have any further questions for staff? Oh, I see Councillor Clausen on the queue. No. Okay. Okay, I see no one on the queue for questions, so it is now time to make a decision. Do we have a mover for the recommendation? Councillor Clausen, seconded by Councillor Meisner. It has been moved and seconded. We are now in debate. I'll advance Councillor Meisner.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I think we had a good discussion today and appreciate Coastal Health coming in particular to share some of their data from a health perspective on the increased availability of alcohol. While I personally have some fundamental disagreements with some of the philosophies around the impact of this change, I do appreciate that data and certainly recognize that alcohol is a significant harm in our society. But I would like to move forward with this, and we'll be supporting the referral report. I believe that this is a relatively small expansion of liquor availability in Vancouver. It's a handful of licenses, and it will lead to increased consumer choice as well as convenience, and I believe without a significant impact on the availability of alcohol in Vancouver. So I think it's the right thing to do, and happy to support the report, while also realizing and recognizing that this will support our local BC wine growers who, as we heard today, are facing some challenging times, and will help us as a city and consumers put our support behind them. So I'm happy to support today.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Meisner. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. I will admit I have been finding this a really challenging issue, sort of unexpectedly challenging for me. I think I remember during the pandemic when I was advocating that we legalize drinking responsibly in parks, and wrestling with the health data there relative to seeing how often people were already drinking in parks and the sort of gaps in equitable enforcement on that. And so I thought a lot about the health data on that front, and really appreciate the very clear health data in this conversation too. The piece that in particular stands out for me is the idea of separate spaces of people who are triggered by alcohol, being able to go into the grocery store and not need to walk past it, not need to see it. That for people who are looking to purchase alcohol, they can go to a store around the corner, they can access it easily, but to not have it everywhere for the many folks in our lives, whether we know it or not, uh, who are avoiding alcohol for a whole range of reasons. And when I think about those people in my own life um, and know so many of the struggles they have gone through, I find that argument really compelling. I know this is a very popular and populist issue, and so I may be coming down on the unpopular side of it, but I do really wrestle with that availability piece, particularly to the question of choice, and folks trying to not be around alcohol and how we support them in that choice as well. So I won't be supporting the recommendations. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Boyle. Councillor Clausen.
Thank you, Chair. So, as was discussed here today, we know that wine and grape production in British Columbia is now a major attraction that's driving tourism, employment, tens of thousands of workers in the sector, our hospitality sector, including growth in education programs, and obviously billions of dollars worth of economic growth. That industry, which is now known widely for sustainable farming practices and for nurturing our agricultural land, is well established in the Okanagan, Similkameen Valleys, the Fraser Canyon, Fraser Valley, the Thompson River region, Shuswap, Vancouver, and Gulf Islands, so literally all over the province. Wine culture is growing here, as is an appreciation and respect for the noble grape. We now have an amazing culinary culture. None of us would ever not take a great deal of pride in our Michelin winners, 9 stars, 17 Bib Gourmand Awards, and 51 Michelin recommended restaurants for a total of 77. We have an amazing growing wine and culinary culture that's happening in the city of our Vancouver that we should be proud to celebrate. We know that the statistics sort of speak for themselves. 83% of Canadians, British Columbians, are only drink in moderation if they drink at all. Stats Can says that heavy drinking is at the lowest levels that has ever been recorded, down almost 40% in 2015 in British Columbia. Impaired driving is down in BC since 2020, 8%. And underage drinking is down by 20% in the last 10 years. And I can tell you just more anecdotally from anything else, from a young daughter and friends and young people that I have, they're part of friends and neighbors' families. Very few of them have I ever seen them involved in any kind of binge drinking. It seems to have kind of become very passe and something that belonged to a culture before the current generation. So I'm not seeing it that much, but doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. We also have widely available direct-to-consumer sales. This is not a question of access. And the actual convenience aspect to it cannot be argued is leading to additional problems with alcohol. In fact, as Mark Hicken said, there's really no evidence to show that increased access to alcohol has led to directly to alcohol-related harm. We know that the pricing is a factor, it's a consideration. These are literally bottles that you would add with a meal, a family meal, and they range in the prices of $22 to $35, depending on what style of wine you get. Sometimes much higher, and those are ones that became family budget decisions. You know, if you were going to be concerned about some of the potential for sins such as gambling or smoking, you know, we have lottery tickets in corner stores. We have cigarettes available. You know, and as well, we've heard that that no other municipality that has adopted these policies is regretting the decision, and nobody's deciding that this has become a problem. And as Mark Hicken also pointed out, that when you do get a situation such as a major event, you have the ability to control access to liquor by closing down stores. The biggest health crisis that we're facing right now, that we see so in such plain evidence in our city, in our province, in our towns and cities, is the toxic drug crisis. And it's very, very important that our health authorities spend all the capacity and effort, again, working to help drive a huge societal change in the attitudes towards illicit drugs. And I hope that that becomes a strong and important emphasis while we actually try and develop a responsible drinking culture here, and essentially treat the people of British Columbia as adults. Prohibitionism that existed in the past, it was proven to be a failure, which is why we've liberalized some of our liquor laws. I think this is a great opportunity to not only provide convenience, it's a chance for us to really celebrate an important culture that is so broadly identified with British Columbia, whether it's in Canada or around the world. So with that, I look forward to supporting these very modest changes to provide more convenience for BC consumers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clausen. Perfectly timed. I see no further councillors on the queue, so I'll call the vote. Clerk, can you take us to the voting screen? Council, please register your vote on the voting panel. And for those of you online, thank you for having your videos on. And clerks, can you please record me in favor?
Chair, can I have a vote assist in favor, please?
Yes. Yes, thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young, and vote in favor for Councillor Kirby-Young. Do we have all registered votes? Okay, great. If we could display those. Okay, that passes with one in opposition, Councillor Boyle. Thank you, Council, and thank you for all those who came to speak today. Let's take a 1-minute recess for staff to clear the room, and if councillors need to step away for a minute, maybe a 2-minute recess if you want a bio break or a cup of coffee. With this agenda, zoning and development bylaw amendments to amp up the arts event license policy to support arts and culture in Vancouver. Does any member of council wish to declare a conflict of interest on item 2? Seeing none, the clerk will now read the application and summary of correspondence received to date.
This is an application by the General Manager of Development, Buildings, and Licensing to amend zoning and development bylaw, license bylaw, building bylaw, and fire bylaw to double the maximum number of permissible days per month for arts events from 3 to 6 days, subject to additional requirements for smoke separations between spaces, combustibility, egress, and other safety measures. Enable arts event organizers to acquire a special event plan check to increase the maximum occupancy load beyond 250 people, with the exact load to be determined by Vancouver Fire Rescue Services, but requiring full compliance with the fire bylaw regarding the number of exits, fire alarm system, supervisory staff, and washrooms, and allow arts events to use adjoining outdoor space, for example, parking lots on private property under the same license. Following correspondence has been received since referral to the public hearing. 2 pieces of correspondence in support and 1 piece of correspondence in opposition. This represents all pieces of correspondence up till 1 p.m. today.
Thanks, clerks. And this is the first call for speakers. Any speakers for this item who wish to speak to council, please call toll-free 1-833-353-8610, followed by the participant code 1061445# before the close of the speakers list. Phone number will be shared online and made available on the live stream. There will be an opportunity for new speakers and missed speakers to be added to the end of the registered speakers list. We have staff from Planning, Urban Design, and Sustainability here to present the application. Go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Dominato. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Hicks. I'm the Chief License Inspector for the City of Vancouver, and I'll be presenting the report for arts and culture event licenses. And we have a number of colleagues with us today from our planning PDS department, ACCS, fire, as well as DBL to help answer questions related to this report. All right, can you go to the next slide, please? So a major issue facing Vancouver arts and culture events scene is a lack of affordable and suitable venue spaces, particularly for smaller and pop-up style events that feature more innovative works. These events usually look to alternative locations like industrial, retail, and office spaces that are otherwise not approved for assembly use. The Arts and Culture Indoor Event License, or the Arts Events License, responded to this need and enabled industrial and retail spaces to be occasionally used for events safely, legally, and through a streamlined process. This program was originally established as a small-scale pilot in 2013, allowing 2 events per month, was made permanent in 2015, and upgraded to 3 days per month with a maximum of 250 people. The program includes a simplified application process and reduced event fees. Since 2018, there have been 192 licensed arts events licenses in Vancouver. As a component of the review program, staff took into consideration nuisance-related noise and the impact of the use on the primary economic use of the locations, particularly for building on industrial lands. Complaints from the community received via 311 and VPD were reviewed, including any fire-related incidents resulting from licensed art events. Of the 192 licensed events, the city only received 11 complaints, while VPD received 1, all of which relating to excessive noise or events taking place beyond the allotted hours on the license. There were no reported fire incidents. Based on this information, staff have determined that there is little nuisance or safety impacts from existing licensed arts events, which further supports expansion. The other consideration was ensuring arts events remained an accessory use to the primary use of the alternative venue, particularly those located in the city's critical and vital industrial zones. Of the 192 licensed arts events, 125, or 65%, took place in industrial zones. 114 of those events occurred during evenings or on weekends, typically after working hours. Further, these arts events on industrial land are highly concentrated in the same addresses. 18 separate addresses hosted 70% of the arts events licenses. With the daytime use of these spaces being primarily artist or production studios. From these findings to date, staff determined that the arts events have not currently displaced industrial users, which supports a cautionary expansion to the program. In 2019, Council unanimously supported Culture Shift, Making Space for Arts and Culture, and the Vancouver Music Strategy. In all three policies, expanding the arts event license program is identified as a recommendation to reduce regulatory barriers for the arts and culture community. On April 12th, Council directed staff to review the Arts and Culture Indoor Event License and relevant bylaws, which include the Zoning and Development Bylaw, License Bylaw, and Building and Fire Bylaws. Council requested that staff bring back recommendations for the potential to increase or double the frequency of events allowed per month, consider allowing an increase to the maximum occupancy for events to be above 250 persons, and consider harmonizing or exceeding the allowable number of special event permits or liquor service licenses issued by the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch. Next slide, please. Staff from DBL, ACCS, and PDS, and Vancouver Fire and Rescue Services reviewed the policy and relevant bylaws. The principles they used to guide their work included an aim to ensure events are held in a safe and healthy manner. In line with Council's direction, we aim to expand opportunities for more arts and culture events with a risk-informed lens to minimize the overall risk. We also wanted to ensure that recommendations continued to preserve making it easy for users to apply and come into compliance. And last but not least, on enabling a fun and vibrant city with innovative events that speaks to the talent, industriousness, and diversity of our local arts and culture community. Staff are recommending the following changes to the Arts Event License Program, which will require amendments to the zoning bylaw, the license bylaw, the Vancouver Building Bylaw, and the fire bylaw. The recommendations include doubling the maximum number of permissible days per month for arts event licenses from 3 up to 6, subject to additional requirements for safety, including smoke separation between spaces, combustibility, egress, and other safety measures. Enabling arts event organizers to acquire a special event plan check to increase the maximum occupant load beyond 250 people, with the exact number to be determined by Vancouver Fire and Rescue Services, and requiring full compliance with the fire bylaw regarding the number of exits, fire alarm systems, supervisory staff, and washrooms, and allow arts events to use adjoining outdoor space, like parking lots, on private property underneath the same license. Staff reviewed the existing requirements for assembly occupancies in the Vancouver Building Bylaw, as well as approaches in other jurisdictions. While there's very little data or best practice from other jurisdictions, as we are the only jurisdiction that has a program like the Arts Event License, in this slide, we have included the existing and the proposed requirements to show what the additional safety requirements are. These added requirements are only triggered when the building exceeds the current frequency limit of 3 days in a month. A building holding events 3 days or less will see no changes. To walk you through these changes, right now, in a building, we allow events of 3 days per month with any 6 days back-to-back spanning 2 months. So 3 days at the end and 3 days at the beginning for 6 continuous days. With the increase of frequency to 6 days per month, we are proposing that back-to-back events would not be permitted, so that 12 continuous days over 2 months would not be allowed. There are no changes to the eligible locations and spaces. Events will continue to be allowed in industrial, retail, and office uses on the ground floor or basement, with the floor being either concrete or certified by a professional to be safe. Increasing the frequency of events per month will result in an increase in risk to fire and other life safety hazard, which is why we're proposing additional requirements. Starting with fire and smoke separations, we are proposing that there be smoke separation between the event space and any other units in the premise to prevent spread into other areas of the building. The next requirement speaks to combustibility. This speaks to the type of materials and how quickly they can catch fire. With the option of 6 days, if a building is not sprinklered, we are proposing that any draperies, fabrics, or other types of combustible hangings have a flame spread rating, or FSR, of 150. Currently, the occupant load allowed for arts events license is a maximum of 250 people. Event organizers will now have the option to increase the occupancy load above 250, regardless of how many days the events are run, with the completion of a special event plan check. The plan check will determine an occupancy load based off criteria like the size of the space, number of exits, sprinklers, and fire alarms. We will speak more to this component in an upcoming slide. For exits and egress, right now the program requires a minimum of 2 exits if there are more than 60 people at the event. When increasing the event days beyond 3, for the proposed options, the number and dimensions of those exits will need to meet the current requirement for the VBBL for safety reasons. This is a continuation of the existing and proposed requirements. I'll focus on the areas where staff are proposing changes. With respect to supervisory staff when liquor is served, the current measures have an escalating requirement for staff depending on the number of event guests. For example, under 100 guests, organizers require 2 supervisory staff, while an event with 201 to 250 guests requires 5 supervisory staff at the event. Staff are not proposing a change to events below 250. However, if the occupancy is above 250, 1 person is required at each of the designated exits with no less than 5 supervisory staff on site during the event. For notification requirements during a fire event, the existing requirement is that the venue must have a fire alarm or have supervisory staff posted at all egress routes to inform participants. Given the heightened safety risks, we will be requiring the installation of either a permanent or temporary fire alarm for the proposed option. Finally, with respect to washrooms, under the current program, there is no regulated minimum. The proposed option of increasing days will require that the number of washrooms comply with the VBBL. This is determined by the occupant load. If a building doesn't have access to permanent washrooms meeting this requirement in the event space, temporary water closets and hygiene stations can be rented to meet that requirement. Where possible, we want to preserve the intent of the original arts event program, which is the simplicity and low cost. However, increasing the frequency of days per month will entail additional safety requirements that require more technical information and approvals from both event organizers and city staff. As mentioned, this includes fire alarms, either permanent or temporary, fire-resistant wall finishings and fabric materials, fire separation between adjacent spaces, as well as egress and exiting requirements. These are reviewed during site inspections by Vancouver Fire and Rescue Services. For means of compliance, we have included the use of temporary fire alarms and portable washroom facilities. These options are something that are already used across the city, including at some events, as well as on things like construction sites. They are generally not cost prohibitive and can be leased from providers in Vancouver. Moving into the second proposed expansion, staff are recommending an option for increasing the occupancy load above 250 persons. Increasing the occupancy load will require the building owner to acquire an occupancy load permit. This is a one-time application per building based on the internal layout. Vancouver Fire and Rescue officers review the capacity and internal configuration, including furniture layout, to determine the maximum occupancy load, including details on how many number of exits and dimensions and distance from those exits. This is a crucial exercise to mitigate fire and life safety risks once a building has a large occupancy load above 250. Once permitted, the space can be used for multiple events with an increased occupancy load with the same layout. A building can be approved for one or multiple configurations through this process. However, any change in the layout, including any structural alterations, would require a new fire permit for occupancies beyond 250 people. If an art event has an increased occupancy beyond 250, they will be subject to an additional requirement to ensure life safety, including the full requirement for the number of exits per the VBBL, a minimum of at least 1 supervisory staff per exit with no less than 5 staff on site, no cooking, even if there's approved facilities like a kitchen, although rewarming of food, for example, catered food, would be allowed. And lastly, the number of washrooms that comply with the VBBL with the option to rent temporary water closets and hygiene stations to meet the requirement. The ability to host more than 250 people at an arts event increases access to the shared experience that an event cultivates, increases visibility for artist groups in showcasing their work, and provides greater flexibility to event organizers in securing a venue that works with their vision without adding to the cost and administrative burden that locations approved for assembly use might prompt. Additional life safety requirements for increased occupancy will require more technical information and approvals from both event organizers and city staff. This includes a fire permit approval by Vancouver Fire and Rescue Services, as well as additional requirements for exit, egress, washrooms, and supervisory staff. To preserve the ease of compliance for organizers, staff are recommending a one-time fire permit application by venue space based off the internal layout using the special event plan check fee. This means that only the initial application for an event in a new location or using a new layout will require more technical analysis and more thorough processing times, with subsequent applications for the same event being processed in an expedited fashion similar to how the Arts Event License Program is currently run. For this permit, staff are recommending using the special event plan check fee for $150 per hour plus GST to reduce the initial cost for the applicant in lieu of the current $600 fee that covers 3 hours of review by Vancouver Fire and Rescue Service for the occupant load permit over 250. Special event plan check fee is an existing fee in the Vancouver Fire bylaw. The final proposed change to the Arts Event License Program is allowing the usage of adjoining outdoor space of a venue. This could include spaces like private parking lots or patio or garden that is connected to the space. Right now, the definition of an arts and culture indoor event means that an event has to be fully contained indoors. In speaking with stakeholders, this was identified as a regulatory barrier, and it requires event organizers to obtain a secondary license to use the adjoining outdoor space, adding to the time and cost. Adding the adjoining space under the same license would remove the requirement for additional licenses. What we are proposing is changing the name of the definition to allow usage of these spaces. Similar to our approach for patios at private restaurants, the total number of people indoors and outdoors cannot exceed the maximum occupancy load that is calculated by Vancouver Fire and Rescue Service. The reason for this is for safety. For example, if there's rain or snow and event participants had to shelter indoors, we would not want the occupancy to overload the building capacity. This does not change the city's current approach for hosting an event on public land, which includes public sidewalks, roads, and plazas. The reason for this is because of public right-of-way considerations, which requires more technical review from city staff, including the special event permit, which is issued by the city's engineering department. With respect to community feedback, staff consulted 7 event organizers and artistic groups on proposed options for expanding the arts event program. In terms of what we heard about the proposed options, there was unanimous support from stakeholders on enabling the usage of adjoining outdoor space, and most of the safety measures did not raise a concern since venues currently already have them, or organizers are in the process of asking the property owner to install them. In general, stakeholders were supportive of the requirement for increasing the frequency of arts event licenses to 6 days per month. Stakeholders also urged the city to consider the possibility of maintaining a tiered option that goes all the way up to 9 days per month. This would mean retaining all options, 6 days and 9 days, each with escalating levels of safety requirements. When reviewing the 9-day option, the heightened requirements increase the effort and potential cost of compliance, with some existing alternative venues being disqualified without the building owner undertaking upgrades. For increasing the maximum occupant load, stakeholders were generally supportive of the requirement for a fire permit and increasing levels of safety requirements for occupant loads above 250. and wanted to make sure that the fire permit is a one-off requirement that can be used for multiple events, providing the safety requirements, number of supervisory staff, emergency instructions, and internal furniture layouts remain the same. Stakeholders also expressed some requests and key asks that as well included a request to increase the threshold for licensed events from 30 to 60 or higher. At this time, staff do not recommend taking this further step, as it would curtail the city's ability to monitor and enforce the fire and life safety provisions pertaining to gatherings of up to 60 people in buildings that are not designed for assembly use. Secondly, stakeholders proposed the option for an annual license as opposed to the current licensing program through these events. Staff are not proposing changes to the overall licensing structure at this time. Thank you for your time. And we do have staff again from DBL, PDS, ACCS, and potentially fire to answer questions.
Thank you for the presentation. I do see councillors on the queue for questions, so we'll proceed with questions. Councillor Kirby-Young, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the work. I'm glad to see this coming back. A couple just kind of clarification questions I'll try to fly through. With respects to the outdoor space, and you said you cannot exceed the max occupancy, so does that mean then that you could have an outdoor or an indoor event, people could flow from indoors to outdoors, but you can't have a bigger event per se because you've now taken the indoor space kind of footage area as well as what the outdoor space is? Is that what that means?
Yeah, so if the interior of the building is approved at, let's say, 100 people, the overall event would have 100% capacity, which would include the indoor and outdoor capacity, so that all occupants could fit within the structure inside.
And, okay, can you help me walk through and understand a little bit why that is? Because similar to the use of patio example, and I'm very familiar with that because there was liquor licensing regulations and you had very specific seats for restaurants. So how does that necessarily apply here? Why is that a direct comparison? I'm not sure that I see the full kind of comparison analogy there.
Sure, I'll start with that if there's anything building wants to jump in on.
You're applying for, maybe just to add to the question, you're applying for a special event license based on the size of your venue, and your size can be set based on that above 250. So why couldn't you say have 150 people because you have a good size outdoor space and an indoor that does 100?
What staff typically see within uses that have outdoor components is that people don't remain within the outdoor component or the indoor component. There's a real free flow of individuals throughout the spaces. In order to ensure that the building component in particular meets the safety requirements, that indoor component has to match the safety of the entire capacity. People don't tend to just walk away, when it rains or when there's inclement weather. They tend to migrate into the building. We want to ensure that that is done safely and matches other processes that are already existing and followed throughout the city.
Okay. Okay. My next question was just around making sure that I really fully understand the days. So as this is outlined, doubling from the 3 to 6 days that are allowed currently per month. Can you just walk me through one more time? The 12-day event is not permitted. So I just want to be very clear. Could somebody hold a 2-day event at the same day coming back and they do a 3? What did you mean by the 12? Like, I'm trying to understand in real terms, if I'm an event planner, what can I and what can't I do with respect
Absolutely.
to that?
In reference to the 12 days in particular, if somebody's operating the building for the last 6 days of the month, they cannot then immediately go in on the first day of the next month and operate another 6. There would need to be a space of time in between those before operating another event. So if you have a longer term event, a longer showing of a show, you need to have breaks in between the 2 6-day components.
Okay, and the rationale for that is because?
Thank you for the question. Kevin Lau, a manager of building policy. So the reason is we're trying to consider the psychology of how people are going to react. One of the challenges is as you extend that period and you get longer and longer, it's becoming more akin to a permanent or long-term usage. It's no longer a temporary usage. So the idea being that if you have a break in between. You're causing them to sort of reset, rethink the security measures that are in place. They're not getting lax in that from that extended duration.
Okay, and presumably because it would be difficult to make a distinction, like say you have an art show. The art show setup might be very different than you have a nightly music festival, for example, where you've got bands playing and they have different impacts.
That's correct.
The surrounding area. Okay. Okay, I have another question. We've continued to see, and I think it's been referenced about the ongoing loss of arts and culture space in the city and how difficult it is and how a lot of folks simply were losing arts and culture because there isn't anywhere for them to host these kinds of unique events, or existing more traditional venues just aren't a fit for a lot of the event folks that are putting these on. So given that we're losing that space, do you think we are being bold enough in doubling from 3 to 6? And I see we have some of our arts and culture colleagues in the room. I see our.
Just noting we have 15 seconds.
I think it's a real hard balancing act, to meet, both in terms of safety and being bold in looking for opportunities to enable more options for arts and culture.
I hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the questions. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. My questions follow well from that. Actually, I'm wondering, I appreciate this next step. I know it's an improvement upon the policy we've had before, and the stakeholder engagement, certainly the conversations we've heard suggest and request we could keep going further. I'm wondering what that looks like, both in terms of the feedback you named around increasing from 30 to 60 the requirement, or moving to 9 days. Is that work that would need to be directed by council, or are staff looking at the impacts over the next year of this change and then would bring back further recommendations?
Staff don't at this time have a planned, next phase or next review for this program. I think at minimum we would want to monitor, the implementation and uptake and understand any impacts related to it prior to considering other opportunities for expansion.
Okay, and if we wanted an update in a year, assuming that monitoring is happening anyway, do we need to request somehow a report back in a year on how that's going, so we can then look at successes, challenges, where to go next? Or is that something staff could just do as a memo, briefing, presentation of some sort?
Yep, staff can note that and work towards that over the next year.
Okay, I think that would be helpful. We'll keep getting questions. It's always helpful when we pass something to hear how it went, because we're all juggling so many things. I am particularly interested in that question about going to 6 or 9. My understanding, or my memory is that the provincial licensing allows 3 events of up to 3 days each. So
When you're speaking about liquor?
yes. So that I'm just curious if we looked at or why we didn't go with matching the city's permitting with what event spaces are the model and dates that the province lays out.
The provincial special event permit for liquor sales is a max of 24 per year. So each organizer, if you're an event organizer or a wedding planner, you can take out 24 SEPs over the course of the year, and each day of event counts towards that 24. They do have a process, for their director in order to consider exceptions to that regulation. But the SEP is intended, for one-off celebrations, family engagements, events, and is not to be a substitute for a permanent liquor license for a location. So they have capped that.
Okay, so it's
less than what we currently at 3 days allow.
Okay, and less than what this new proposal is. That's helpful. I think that's all of my questions for now. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Boyle. We do have a number of registered speakers, and so we will hear from the public at this time. I will do a second call for speakers. So first of all, if there are any speakers who wish to speak to this item, please call toll-free 1-833-353-8610, followed by the participant code 1061445# before the close of the speakers list today. Phone number will be shared online and made available on the live stream. Any speakers in the council chamber, please come forward to the podium before the close of the speaker list. Just as a reminder to speakers, I know we have a number here, you do have 5 minutes to make your comments and councillors may ask you questions. We'll start with our first registered speaker, who I believe is on the line, Hafiz Akinluzi, founder of Made by We Projects Co-op. Hafiz, are you on the line? And please correct me around pronunciation if I didn't get that right.
Speaker number 1 is not on the line.
Thank you. Our second speaker, Sheena Botello, owner of Slice. Also, we're expecting her on the line.
I am here, yes.
Hi, Sheena. You can go ahead and you have 5 minutes.
Yeah, well, first want to thank you for the opportunity to speak and even considering this advancement to the arts and culture licensing. I'm a business owner and a resident of Vancouver, so I am personally in favor of this change. Specifically, the increased quantity, the increased capacity size isn't a factor for our space as we are a small space. Our capacity was 65. And I say was because pre-COVID, we did balance our business plan between studios, retail, and our arts and culture liquor license. So we're a studio foremost. We have an auxiliary retail license, and then the arts and culture license was an awesome application we added in. However, it being only 3 times a month caused mass confusion with our community. Our marketing was limited due to funding, and mostly the consumer feedback we got was they never knew if we were going to be open or not. They knew our retail hours, they knew the base of the business, but they never knew which days we might be hosting an event because they were so infrequent and far between. We host specifically artists, visual artists, painters, illustrators. Our mandate is that we believe in radical inclusivity. We want all artists to have this opportunity, and we believe you have to be an emerging artist from Vancouver. So we're supporting small artists that have small communities and really want to show just limited work. With this license, yeah, it was just impossible to keep up. It was impossible to really market, and we just found it was just a waste of our time and energy. We were better off to do away with events altogether and just focus on our retail and studio. So it really did limit us, and we just weren't able to really commit to anything because what do we commit to? The first 3 Fridays of the month, maybe the first weekend of the month with a Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It just didn't make any sense. So since COVID, consumers have changed their interactions with us. They no longer really care to drink or gather in groups, which is great, but it is strictly just the limited amount of licensing is the reason we do not participate and why we don't host these events any longer. We hope to do it again, and I think 6 times a month would be amazing. It would allow me to have a regular program like every Saturday, hosting arts and culture community events. So I think it would be amazing for us. I am not voting, but I am personally in favor of the change of increasing to 6 times a month. And that's about all I have to say. So yeah, that's it.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for calling in. I don't see anyone for questions. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is in person, Anna Rose Carrico, Director of the Red Gate Art Society.
Also, Carrico. Everyone gets it wrong except for German speakers.
The same problem. Go ahead, and you do have 5 minutes.
Sure thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my name is Anna Rose Carrico. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm speaking in favor of this bylaw. Together, we are going to discover if I can actually read the notes that I made in my own handwriting. So I'm speaking on behalf of the Red Gate Art Society. So our essential mandate is to provide as affordable as possible studio space and rehearsal space for creatives in Vancouver. We also serve to provide a platform for artists that want to showcase their skills as well as gain experience in live performance. We operate on a profit-sharing model, which means that emerging artists can have events without having to worry about losing money. So the Red Gate actually consulted on this policy when it was developed. In fact, the last time I spoke here was in favor of it in whenever that was, 2015. And we've been using it ever since. So while we did celebrate this, that was a huge step, we were really clear from the start that 3 events per month is not enough to sustain an arts organization that is wishing to get revenue from events. Because of the limited number of permits, a lot of smaller grassroots organizations in this city feel that it's not worth it to undergo the process in order to obtain an arts events license like the previous person spoke to. So I think a lot of the smaller organizations are faced with a choice essentially where they abandon having events at all, but there are also some that are just going further underground, which is super detrimental to the safety of anyone attending these events. Every single arts organization is barely surviving as it is, as most people know. The BC cost of living, real estate, but as well as the bureaucratic knowledge needed to navigate this kind of licensing stuff, I think is also a deterrent. Anyone involved in this sector is already working at full capacity, and a lot of people have day jobs or side gigs, other contracts, et cetera. These are small businesses that are run by a group of incredibly dedicated, skilled, and passionate people. They have an invaluable impact on the local nighttime economy, while also cultivating local talent, many of whom go on to increase Vancouver's profile in the global music scene. The vast majority of revenues from these organizations goes directly to creators. According to the City of Vancouver's music strategy, Vancouver's music scene creates tens of thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars annually. None of this would be possible without these grassroots events that are generally the first step for the vast majority of creatives. The most important aspect of this program is to ensure that small arts venues are inspected to establish that they are safe and up to code before they can have events. Shortly after the city launched the pilot version of this program, 36 people died in a fire at an artist collective while they were hosting an unlicensed event at the Ghost Ship in Oakland. If Oakland had implemented a policy similar to this, that tragedy could have been avoided. Fundamentally, these events are happening and they'll continue to happen. At this point, it is sort of a question of harm reduction. So being able to have these inspections and ensure that they are safe is the best way to meet these venues where they're at, or these arts organizations. So us as an organization that has taken the steps to comply with this bylaw since it was implemented, limiting us to 3 events per month seems frustratingly arbitrary. We've been inspected and deemed safe for 3 events. There should be no reason that the space would be safe, not safe for 6 or 9 or 20. If the goal of this program is to promote safety and development of the local music community, giving us the ability to host more safe, accessible events is pretty self-evident. On a personal note, I've lived in Vancouver my entire life. I love this city. I've worked my whole adult life to ensure that there is a space for emerging artists to practice, experiment, and perform. The grassroots music community in Vancouver has an unbelievable wealth of talent. For years, we've been experiencing a talent drain as these creators go to different cities where they can receive more support in their practice. Yeah, we have everything it takes to be a world-class city. We need the city's help to do that. This would be a huge first step, as well as a clear indicator of the city's support of the art scene in Vancouver.
Thanks, Anna Rose. Thanks for speaking today. Appreciate that. Our 4th speaker is Paige Frewer, owner-operator Birdhouse Eastside Studios. On the line?
I'm just checking. No, speaker 4 is not on the line.
Okay, we'll come back to Paige. Rin Bros, owner-operator Eastside Studios in person. Hi. Welcome.
Hi there. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. I'm Paige's business partner, so I feel like I can say pretty much what they're going to. I'm here representing my business and my community. I co-own and operate the Birdhouse, also known as Eastside Studios. It's a mixed-use space where artists create and present work, and queer community gather for a variety of cultural and arts events. I came to this work through performing drag and meeting Paige, the producer of Vancouver's longest running drag show, Man Up. I began working with Paige and producing queer events at local venues around town. And then in 2017, many of the venues and spaces began closing. Losing the precious few spaces open to hosting queer nights was an enormous loss for our community. When we approached other venues at the time, most had no interest in hosting queer arts events, especially those events more focused on queer women and trans folks. Or their booking fees were far, far, far out of budget. The loss of space for our events is the major reason we decided to work together to lease our own commercial space and try our hand at creating our own do-it-yourself arts and culture venue. We believe there needs to be more spaces in the city for our community to come together. Around this time, we were also informed by many folks in the arts community that there was a lack of spaces for studios and makers. These two needs garnered us to open Eastside Studios as the mixed-use arts event space in 2018. Although this move represented a fairly risky and intimidating business endeavor for both of us, it was made possible by the Arts Event Licensing Program, which enabled us to activate an industrial warehouse space on Malkin Avenue with public events. In the last 5 years, we've grown to become a cherished community hub from events ranging from fine art shows, drag theater productions, live music, DJ shows, mural showcases, poetry readings, fundraisers, maker markets to choir shows. There's been an enormous amount of support and demand for these events. We are an entirely queer and trans-owned operated organization with a focus on fair pay and compensating all the artists that we work with. We do not have the financial resources to open a cabaret, live music venue, or nightclub with a permanent licensing, as much as we'd like to do that, and it'd be a dream. The Arts and Events Licensing Program is the reason our business can exist at all, but in its current form and in the current economy, it's outdated, limiting, prohibitive, and is a barrier for new businesses to start and survive, especially arts-based businesses, which are have less financial resources. Increasing the number of events from 3 to 6, I would love 9 if that's on the table, would have immediate, lasting, positive impacts for myself, for my staff, for our contractors, for our artists, and for our community. The demand for queer event spaces has never been higher. We would be able to fill all those additional dates immediately. If council approves these recommendations programming today, we could double our contribution to the goals of Culture Shift. This would not only fulfill important unmet needs for the LGBTQA+ community, but it would also greatly contribute into the sustainability of our small business and result in more work and jobs. We train, recruit, and mentor folks within our community, providing a safer and welcoming work environment that many queer folks can't find elsewhere. So increasing our staffing and supporting the local economy and contributing skilled workers to Vancouver's broader creative industry. Many of the performers, technicians, contractors, artists, and entrepreneurs who have been trained and mentored in our spaces have gone on to expand their own professional careers in venues beyond our own. We are incredibly proud of this. Eastside has become a space where folks can develop new passions, gain skills, starting their own sole proprietorships, which has become a trend amongst a lot of our staff and artists. In its current form, the Arts Event Licensing Program inadvertently encourages noncompliance because spaces know they can't survive on 3 events a month. Events are a vital component of our overall business operations, which we do alongside renting creative studio spaces to artists. We have grown steadily and organically over our business's lifetime and demonstrated a value-driven leadership. The limitations of the Arts and Events Licensing Program is preventing us from realizing our potential and serving the community to the extent that we are capable of and the extent that we are being asked to by our community. I urge you to expand the Arts and Events Licensing Program to 6 or 9 events per month. Thank you.
Thanks, Rin, and I don't see anyone on for questions, but appreciate you coming in person today. Great, thank you. Speaker number 6 is Emily Mitchell. Do we have Emily on the line?
Hi, yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hi, Emily. Yep, we can hear you. You have 5 minutes.
Amazing. Firstly, thank you so much for taking the time to hear from us all today, and myself included. But yeah, in fear of sounding like a bit of an echo chamber, I may repeat a bunch of the previous points, but I think that only further supports the revision. So I am here to formally say that I support the revision and expansion of the Arts and Culture Permitting Program that provides so many of us with the basis of our jobs and business and community spaces. I personally have lived in so-called Vancouver for 6 years. And 2 months after I moved here, I attended my first ever event called Man Up. It was a queer drag show I followed this event and many more like it all around the city in pop-up venues and spaces that were all able to gather, like anywhere that was able to gather community in, which I learned was only possible by programs like what we're advocating for here. While my plan was never to stay in the city for more than 3 months, Vancouver's vibrancy and rich art scene kept me here. The events kept me connected to my community and involved in diverse offerings of art-based events, specifically queer events, which I love. When COVID hit, we suffered the loss of these spaces, and the impacts are still being felt from that, with so many artists struggling to find host venues to showcase their work and events. I was ready to leave the city. I gave it 2 more months. I'm glad I did, because the city has begun to flourish again, filled with vibrant colors, and the arts and culture scene really blossomed. It found homes in warehouses and pop-up venues, in halls and offices, all that were made possible by this program, but as we've all said, have kind of been made in an unsustainable way for any one collective to make it a profitable and sustainable business for themselves. Whilst I am lucky enough to have lived within walking distance of many of these events over the years and seeing how much it truly enriches the community, I will also acknowledge that some of it does come with some issues that get arised over like any disturbances in neighborhoods from noise or traffic or otherwise. While I personally have never experienced any of these, and I live within walking distance of so many of these, I don't foresee that being an issue either. I cannot dismiss that they may occur. As I witnessed some of these events finding more permanent homes, we saw the limitations take place on the venues that were hosting them, having to pivot programming and their businesses to align with the regulations that no longer felt fitting through this program. Limiting spaces to 3 permits per month make the reality of having hubs in Vancouver unachievable and unsustainable, making venues forced to host events based on profitability to afford rent versus being able to host a variety to showcase and uplift a more diverse range of events of varying sizes within capacity limits. This is ultimately a loss for our various subculture within communities who benefit from these events, alongside the city overall losing out on these events. These permits also allow for so many jobs within community. It enriches all intersects of our art and culture scene and allows so many folks to start their own businesses, become independent contractors, and for spaces to allow artists to express any of their views to the community. All benefits for so-called Vancouver and its occupants and economy. I have the privilege of working at Eastside Studios. We just heard from Ren, who is the owner-operator there. It is an amazing artistic collective which is able to operate and hold events using these permits. It's a queer and trans-owned and run space, housing all facets of the artistic expression, and acts as a central hub within the community for all different groups and all different intersections. Through working there and attending events there, I've been able to attend live singing events, drag events, educational training, speaking events, mentoring, and showcases of so many multidisciplinary artists and their work. These spaces are more than these so-called nightclubs. They are a collection of exactly art and culture, what these permits are designed for. Sorry, I lost my...
Emily, you just have about 10 seconds.
Oh, no! I guess I will sum up by saying by expanding this to either 6 or 9 permits a month, it does allow the community to flourish, ultimately benefiting Vancouver as a whole to showcase its wealth of talent and unique, amazing artists that work in the city. And yeah, so sorry I went over.
That's all right. Thanks very much, Emily, for calling in. There's no questions for you, but we appreciate you calling in today. Thank you. We'll move to speaker number 7, John Boris, VP of Strata, Canvas EPS 3641. Do we have John on the line? Go ahead, John.
Here.
Hi, you have 5 minutes, John. Go ahead.
I'm supposed to have 7 if I'm speaking on behalf of a group, but maybe you could look at that.
Hang on just one second. We'll just. John, are you able to identify the three individuals you're speaking on behalf of?
Well, I'm speaking on behalf of 230 residences. I can name off our entire strata committee if that would help. And
Oh, okay. They have to be with you in this context, either whether it be on the phone, on the line, or in person. So you do have 5 minutes, John.
okay, sounds good. Thank you. So we're speaking in I guess in opposition of this, and I'm going to just go through the situation that we're currently dealing with in regards to one of these places of business. The name of the business is called The Vault. What the business is under is actually called an art society. For us in our building, it's nothing more than a rave. This business started up in early June, and since that time, I'm just going to quickly rattle off the events that have taken place there. June 10th, July 1st, July 2nd, August 19th, June, and those are outdoor events. The indoor events, June 17th, July 14th, July 29th, August 12th, August 18th, August 25th, September 9th, September 15th, September 16th. And there are the future events that are coming up, October 20th, 27, 28, 31, November 3, 5, 10, 17, 18, and 24. Since the start of this, we have been going through the proper channels of raising the concerns of noise complaints, public intoxication, drug paraphernalia laying around the streets in our area, which, by the way, is 384 East 1st Avenue, just to give some reference. You guys probably know where we are because we're at the epicenter of the Broadway subway. So we've been dealing with numerous issues for the last few years, but very respectfully. Getting back to this business, so they've been having these late night events. They've had day events. The noise has been so excessive that we have contacted VPD numerous times. We call 311 numerous times by numerous people. All of these can be fact checked as well too afterward. And what we see is, and what scares us about this new sort of, the way this the city wants to go with, is that there is basically no follow through or very limited follow through when it comes to inspections, because these events take place after hours. These events usually start at 10, 11 p.m. and they run until 5 or 6 a.m. The noise that is produced from these events, which is, if anyone, I'm sure everyone here on this call knows what a rave is, and the type of sort of techno music that generates and the bass sound, it rattles our building. It rattles the windows, it rattles the doors, and it is ruining the livelihood of the residents of our building and the building next to it, which is Artec, which has, I think, another 100 and some odd residences, and we are working with their strata council as well too, so that we are coming at this from a joint effort. We're currently working with one person, Vanya Say, at the city, and also Mark McLennan, who is manager of property use inspections team, to try and figure out what's going on. We have now found out that this business does not actually have a business license and that it has been operating illegally, but again, due to some privacy issues, we're not able to get full access on what is actually happening and will this venue actually get a business license. When we saw this come up and we found out that there was going to be this public thing come up, we wanted to share, I guess, firsthand sort of information of what we're dealing with this type of thing. And I should say, none of us are against, this type of, or arts and any of this stuff. In fact, that's why the majority of us live in Mount Pleasant, and even our building was zoned with that in mind.
so that people could have, run different things out of their units. And again, it's a great thing. The fear we have is that there just isn't, or we have not been able to see from a city standpoint, that there's anything in place to actually realistically monitor these types of venues, and that that we would have confidence that if there was something that got out of control, that there would be anything that would happen to it. Because again, we've been dealing with this since June, and we've seen nothing come of this. Again, we walked past early in the morning after these events, and the amount of packages of that housed MDMA or different types of narcotics, we can see them on the ground. We know what they look like, and again, that's not even to mention the amount of alcohol bottles or everything strewn around our neighborhoods.
John,
And again, the
John,
city, yes.
John, I'm just going to interrupt you because
Yep.
you are at your 5 minutes. I do have a quick question for you, so if you just want to stay on the line for 1 minute. So just appreciate the concerns you're raising. You mentioned the vault. Is it at 247 East First? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
Okay. So I'll just note we do have several of our staff here in chambers with us, and so they've would have noted the address and the concerns you've raised. And as you noted, it sounds like you are working actively with staff around that. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. But otherwise, there are no councillors here with questions for you today. But thank you for phoning in.
Okay, thank you. We'll continue. I guess we'll continue to send information off, and if just being honest, if we don't see action by the city, then we our only choice will be to go to media and to have them hopefully get involved on our behalf.
I do see nodding heads in the room here in chambers, so you've got the ear of staff right now. So thank you and appreciate you calling in.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll move to our final speaker, number 8, Chris Reed, Creative Director, Queer-Based Media at the Birdhouse, who I understand is in...
Hi.
Hi, Chris.
Thank you for hearing me speak today. My name is Chris Reed. I also go by the drag pseudonym Continental Breakfast. As you said, I own and operate a media production company called Queer-Based Media. Just for some context, we hire over 50 plus queer contractors every year. We're a queer-only operated company, and we also provide to over 50 clients per year in our first 3 years of operation. I'm a member of the interdisciplinary drag collective, The Darlings. We're an internationally touring drag collective that has brought conceptual theater to Vancouver Drag. And I'm also the creative director of Birdhouse and Eastside Studios, formerly creative director of Vancouver Art and Leisure and Canna Clinic dispensary chain. I'm Beardy's Okimesa's Cree and have been an artist here and producing events for over 8 years and at 11 venues. And that was over the span of 12 years. I'm here to highlight today the invaluable work of our organization has been doing in Vancouver these past 5 years. We've been at the forefront of producing queer programming in the city, promoting inclusivity and celebrating diversity. Since 2018, we've operated our events under the Arts Event Licensing Program, which has been crucial in fostering a thriving arts and culture scene. However, us and many arts organizations, obviously, and city officials have also identified a strong need for amendments to the program. I'm just going to say 9 events a month since we've evolved to there. 6 is great, but it is a good starting point. There are 8 weekend nights per month, so 9 would be fantastic. Echoing my colleague Rin's statements and also echoing the behavior of my community, losing spaces when there are only a handful of them for queer people is devastating. It's completely harm-inducing, and it can cause so much danger in our community. People need a sense of togetherness, especially when there aren't any bars that are actually safe for us. And secondly, allowing certain spaces to meet that appropriate life safety requirements to welcome audiences over 250. Given the space requirements, it's completely valid to request over 250. It would support our work and our community immensely. It would also open the door to a wider variety of events and cultural programming, which I can speak from experience on. This doesn't just broaden our audience base, it broadens tourism, it broadens a better way to serve our community and more diverse people that we see directly rather than people that aren't in the scene. This change would allow a positive impact on our financial stability too, because it's not sustainable as it is. And right now we're having to focus on financially fiscal events, which is not ideal because artistic integrity suffers and it's sacrificed when you only have to focus on events that make money rather than ones that are going to increase culture. We also strongly advocate the amendment that would allow us to utilize adjoining outdoor spaces for certain events. We have a really big, great parking lot that we can keep nice and safe and secure, and it's still on our property. This would not only continue our efforts to ensure COVID safety, but also would enable lower sensory areas for our patrons because we do provide that to a lot of our events, which is not a common industry standard. Additionally, it would enable higher audience capacities, making our events more accessible to the community. We could charge less for tickets. It's just like an immediate payoff. And finally, I want to emphasize that our organization has played a pivotal role in nurturing and promoting queer-owned small businesses and sole proprietorships like Queer-Based Media. These businesses extend far beyond just the event space and the studios that operate there. I'm able to hire people all year and be able to help them pay their bills, and I take a lot of pride in that, and I owe that to the space for offering me sustainable rental fees for the past 3 years. And it's if you talk to any queer person in our community, the impact is known and the inception and growth of the space has been obvious. By adopting these proposals, we can continue to foster a thriving and inclusive community where creativity and entrepreneurship can flourish. I don't want to sacrifice artistic integrity anymore. I'm sick of throwing events that I know are going to make money. I want to throw events that I know people are going to need. And I also want to address that the requirement for the AEL permit for events with 30 guests or more also goes hand in hand with that. It should be 60. There are so many events that are theater-based, choir, knowledge sharing, panels, comedy, fundraisers. There's like countless events that are between 30 and 60, and having 30 is not sustainable. So obviously I'm in favor of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris, and appreciate the passion as well. So thank you. I think that is all of our registered speakers, and so I will do a third call for additional speakers at this time. If you wish to speak to this item, please call toll-free 1-833-353-8610, followed by the participant code 1061445 # before the close of the speakers list. Phone number will be shared online and made available on the live stream. If any speakers are in the council chamber, please come forward to the podium. We will take a 5-minute recess to see if we have any further speakers on this item. council. I'm going to call the meeting back to order. Clerks, do we have any further speakers?
Just double checking. No, no speakers for this item.
Okay, thank you. In that case, seeing there's no further speakers, the speakers list is now closed. Also seeing there are little or no comments received after 12 p.m., I'm now closing receipt of public comments. Do staff have any closing comments on this item? No. Are there any questions for staff? Councillor Kirby-Young, I'll advance you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the one that was asked earlier. I sort of asked if we could be bolder, and I think Councillor Boyle asked around the 6 versus 9. And I know that the life safety answer was pretty compelling, but just so that everybody's clear moving forward, because I suspect we'll get this question quite a lot, it doesn't necessarily preclude us from increasing in the future, but we do feel again that this is the sweet spot based on the safety piece, and it's more the safety versus triggering additional requirements and getting away from the simplicity and cost philosophy. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that encapsulates it really well. You know, these buildings aren't inherently set up for assembly use, and the consequences could be quite drastic. So really working to find a balance of enabling this, of being the only jurisdiction that enables this, and maintaining safe spaces was the goal that staff had.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kirby-Young, and I don't see any other councillors on the queue. So would you like to move the recommendations? I have a seconder. I have Councillor Zhou seconding. So I have a mover and seconder. Any debate? So Councillor Kirby-Young, did you want to speak now or come up?
No, I can go I can go after.
You're going to go now?
No, I see Councillor Boyle on the queue first.
I'll advance. Councillor Boyle. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. Just really appreciate the community bringing these requests forward 6 months ago or a year ago or however long, and Councillor Kirby-Young bringing the motion forward and the work that happened between the community and staff to get to this point. I really hear and appreciate that this is an important next step, and that it will make the incredible array of events that arts organizations are already hosting more possible. And I appreciate the point of being able to give some breathing room to the amount of financial stress that is on each individual event, so that more events can happen that don't need to be so heavily focused on making money to sustain the organization, and there can be a wider range of events that are needed by the community, even if they're not financially lucrative. I know so much of what happens across the arts and culture sector is about arts, and so helping take some of that pressure off, I think, is excellent. I would love to see us go further than this, and so really appreciate staff being willing to bring the results back, some more information on the impacts and successes of this change back a year from now, so we can look at where there's space to go further, whether it's up to 60 people, whether it's up to 9 nights, or some other measure there. I think that would be great. So happy to see this move forward. I look forward to some of the dance parties.
Thank you, Councillor Boyle. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thanks. And I will echo similar comments. I really appreciate the work that staff did on this one. This is the thing that makes me happy about my job, is that it sometimes bylaws seem mundane and a little dry, and they are, but they actually matter in terms of what they allow to happen and what they don't allow to happen. And so this one was great. As was mentioned, this really came forth from the community. So I wanted to give a shout out. I know we didn't hear from Paige, but from Paige Furr and Steph Love from Mural Fest. And they were the ones that reached out and initiated this. So I love the fact that it was the community themselves that identified the constraints. Really appreciated hearing from the different speakers. Thanks for coming in person. Really appreciate that. But we heard around what this will actually mean in doubling the number of events means that folks like Slice can host a regular event on Saturdays, which is really important for people, for community, and understanding how and where they can show up. You know, we heard from Redgate. I think that was important in terms of balancing the conversation around safety. I tend to be bold. I'd love to. I've also gone to 9, but I think we heard that there may be opportunities to do that in the future. But I think this is kind of striking a bit of the right balance there. That really resonated me when we heard Rin say that it's been really difficult to find space for specific groups and communities in the city, especially women and trans and folks in our queer community. And what we want to do is find spaces so that people are not pushed out. They don't feel welcome, like this isn't their city, and that it doesn't go underground, because that's not great either. I also loved about hearing about the diversity of different kinds of events. It could be live music, but it's not always. You know, it's drag, it's art, it's makers markets. We heard comedy, fundraisers, panels, all of those things that bring people together. And arts and culture is, in its very essence, what actually connects us. It's sort of part of our humanity and allows that expression. And it is community, right? It is the chance to be part of something. So I really appreciate sort of the community driving this one. It's usually where the best things come from because people are living it and they're like, they understand the frustrations are usually where the friction points are. And when we're able to fix them, it's a good day at City Hall. And so I'm really glad that we brought this forward and Councillor Meisner joined me on that. I think, remember the first time we sat down and had a cup of tea on a rainy, as it happens, afternoon in Vancouver. And so happy to support this and appreciate everybody coming out to champion for it. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Kirby-Young. Councillor Meisner.
Yeah, thanks very much. And thanks everyone for coming in today. I've been to many of these events and I'm looking forward to there being more of them in Vancouver. There is huge demand for sure. And I know some people that are involved, whether they're dancing or performing there. So, but I think this is a big win for vibrancy in Vancouver in terms of nightlife. And of course, to support the queer community and other marginalized communities in our city, like the BIPOC community. So, I really appreciate the comments around the financial viability, not feeling similar to Councillor Boyle that mentioned as well, that you have to host events just to survive with the 3 events a month. And I think the doubling is great, but certainly would also support us going further in the future if it's possible. And also to staff, I think you did a great job with all the due diligence in terms of meeting the fire bylaw and the full compliance that this increase will achieve. So I think this is a great day at City Hall. It's probably more exciting than approving development. Not that that's important, but yeah, really, really happy to see this and excited for more events and more vibrancy and good times in Vancouver.
Thanks, Councillor Meisner. Appreciate those comments. And I've just added myself to the queue just simply to echo the thanks of my colleagues. I'm going to keep it quite short and sweet. And thank you to the speakers and thanks to Councillor Kirby-Young for bringing forward this motion. I think it is really important in supporting our arts and culture community. And so I will certainly be supporting it. And I'll just, before we move to the vote, just remind my colleagues who are online, please ensure you have your videos on. It looks like you do. And seeing no further speakers or our councillors on the queue, we will go to a vote. Clerk, can you take us to a voting screen? And council will get you to register your vote on the panel. For myself, please register me in favor. Okay, thank you, council. Just waiting for the results. And that passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. That's fantastic. And that concludes. Yes, you can be happy over there, joyful. That concludes this public hearing. So I do need a motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded, Councillor Zhou. All in favor? That carries. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.